to get up this tree? A few minutes later, Seaborg and Harvey were on either side of Sagan, who was crouched and balancing on the bent trunk.
"Any last words?" Harvey said. "I've always thought you were a real pain in the ass, Harvey," Sagan said.
Harvey smiled. "I love you too, Lieutenant." He nodded to Seaborg. "Now," he said. They dropped. The tree whipped up. Sagan adjusted and fought against the acceleration to keep her position. When the tree reached the apex of its swing, Sagan kicked off, adding her own force to the force of the tree launch. Sagan arced impossibly high, it seemed to her, easily clearing the guns, which tracked her but could not fire. The guns followed her until she was beyond the perimeter and rapidly arcing toward the meadow beyond. She had time to think, "This is going to hurt," before she balled up and plowed into the ground. Her unitard stiffened, absorbing some of the impact, but Sagan felt at least one rib crack from the hit. The stiffened unitard caused her to roll farther than she would have otherwise. She eventually came to a stop and, lying in the tall grass, tried to remember how to breathe. It took a few more minutes than she expected. In the distance, Sagan heard Harvey and Seaborg calling for her. She also heard a low drone from the other direction, growing higher in pitch the longer she listened. Still lying in the tall grass, she shifted her position and tried to see over it. A pair of oven were coming, riding a small armed craft. They were coming right toward her. "The first thing you have to understand is that the colonial union is evil," Bhutan said to Jared. Jared's headache had returned with a vengeance, and he longed to see Zoe again. "I don't see it," he said. "Well, why would you?" Bhutan said. "You're a couple of years old at most, and all your life has been made up of doing what someone else has told you to do. You've hardly made choices of your own now, have you?" "I've had this lecture already," Jared said, recalling Kynan. "From someone in Special Forces?" Bhutan asked, genuinely surprised. "From an array prisoner," Jared said, "named Kynan. Says he met you once." Bhutan furrowed his brow. "The name isn't familiar," he said. "But then I've met quite a few Array and Enishans recently. They all tend to blur, but it makes sense. An Array would tell you this. They find the whole Special Forces setup morally appalling." "Yes, I know," Jared said. "He told me I was a slave." "You are a slave," Bhutan said excitedly. "Or an indentured servant at the very least, bound to a term of service over which you have no control. Yes, they make you feel good about it by suggesting you were born specially to save humanity, and by chaining you to your platoon mates through integration, but when it comes right down to it, those are just ways they use to control you. You're a year old, maybe 2. What do you know about the universe anyway? You know what they've told you, that it's a hostile place and that we are always under attack. But what would you say if I told you that everything the Colonial Union told you was wrong?" "It's not wrong," Jared said. "It is hostile. I've seen enough combat to know that." "But all you've seen is combat," Bhutan said. "You've never been out where you weren't killing whatever the Colonial Union tells you to. And it's certainly true that the universe is hostile to the Colonial Union. And the reason for that is the Colonial Union is hostile to the universe. In all the time humanity has been out in the universe, we've never not been at war with nearly every other species we've come across. There are a few here or there the Colonial Union deems useful as allies or trade partners, but so few as to have their numbers be insignificant. We know of 603 intelligent species inside the Colonial Union's skip horizon direct. Do you know how many the CU classifies as a threat, meaning the CDF is able to preemptively attack at will? 577. And you're actively hostile toward 96% of all the intelligent races you know about. That's not just stupid. It's racial suicide. Other species are at war with each other, Jared said. It's not just the colonial union that goes to war. Yes, Bhutan said. Every species has other species it competes with and goes to war against. But other species don't try to fight every other species they come across. The Array and the Enisha were longtime enemies before we allied them. And who knows, maybe they will be again. But neither of those species classifies all the other races as a permanent threat. Nobody does that but the colonial union. Have you heard of the Conclave, Dirac? No, Jared said. The Conclave is a great meeting between hundreds of species in this part of the galaxy, Bhutan said. It convened more than 20 years ago to try to create a workable framework of government for the entire region. It would help stop the fighting for real estate by apportioning new colonies in a systematic way, rather than having every species run for the prize and try to beat off whoever tries to take it away. It would enforce the system with a multi-species military command that would attack anyone who tried to take a colony by force. Not every species has signed on to the Conclave, but only 2 species have refused even to send representatives. One is the Kansu, because why would they? The other is the Colonial Union. You expect me to take your word for that, Jared said. I don't expect anything from you, Bhutan said. You don't know about it. The rank-and-file CDF doesn't know about it. The Colonials certainly don't know about it. The Colonial Union has all the spaceships, skip drones, and communication satellites. It handles all the trade and what little diplomacy we engage in on its space stations. The Colonial Union is the bottleneck through which all information flows, and it decides what the colonies learn and what they don't. And not just the colonies. It's Earth, too. Earth is the worst. Why? Jared asked. Because it's been kept socially retarded for 200 years, Bhutan said. The Colonial Union farms people there, Dirac. Uses the rich colonies there for its military, uses the poor colonies for its colonial seed stock, and it likes the arrangement so much that the Colonial Union actively suppresses the natural evolution of society there. They don't want it to change. That would mess up their production of soldiers and colonists. So they sealed Earth off from the rest of humanity to keep the people there from knowing just how perfectly they're being held in stasis. Manufactured a disease. They called it the crib, and told the people on Earth it was an alien infection. Used it as an excuse to quarantine the planet. They let it flare up every generation or 2 just to maintain the pretense. I've met people from Earth, Jared said, thinking of Lieutenant Cloud. They're not stupid. They would know if they were being held back. Oh, the Colonial Union will allow an innovation or 2 every couple of years to make them think they're still on a growth curve. But it's never anything useful, Bhutan said. A new computer here, a music player there, an organ transplant technique. They're allowed the occasional land war to keep things interesting. Meanwhile, they have all the same social and political structures they had 200 years earlier, and they think it's because they've reached a point of genuine stability. And they still die of old age at 75. It's ridiculous. The Colonial Union has managed Earth so well it doesn't even know it's being managed. It's in the dark. All the colonies are in the dark. Nobody knows anything. Except you, Jared said. I was building the soldiers, Dirac, Bhutan said. They had to let me know what was going on. I had top secret clearance right until the moment I shot that clone of mine. That's why I know the Conclave is out there. And that's why I know if the Colonial Union isn't killed, humanity's going to get wiped out. We seem to have held our own up to this point, Jared said. That's because the Colonial Union takes advantage of chaos, Bhutan said. When the Conclave ratifies its agreement, and it will in the next year or 2, the Colonial Union won't be able to found colonies anymore. The Conclave's military force will kick them off any planet they try to take. They won't be able to take over anyone's colonies either. we'll be bottled up. And when another race decides to take one of our worlds, who will stop them? The Conclave won't protect races that won't participate. Slowly but surely we'll be whittled back to one world again, if we're left with that.
Unless we have a war,
Jared said, not hiding his skepticism. That's right, Bhutan said. The problem isn't humanity. It's the colonial union. Get rid of the colonial union. Replace it with a government that actually helps its people instead of harming them and keeping them ignorant for its own purposes. And join with the Conclave to get a reasonable share of new colonial worlds. You in charge, I presume, Jared said. Until we get things organized, yes, Bhutan said. Minus the worlds that the RA and the Enisha, your allies in this adventure, take for their own, Jared said. The RA and the Enisha weren't going to fight for free, Bhutan said. And the Oban taking Earth, Jared said. That's for me, Bhutan said. Personal request. Must be nice, Jared said. You continue to underestimate how badly the Oban want consciousness, Bhutan said. I like this better when I thought you were just trying to get revenge for Zoe, Jared said. Bhutan reared back, as if he had been slapped. Then he leaned in close. You know what the thought of losing Zoe did to me, Bhutan hissed. You know it! But let me tell you something that you don't seem to know. After we took that call from the array, the CDF Military Intelligence Office predicted the array would make a counterattack and listed the 5 most likely targets. Omaha and Cobble Station were right at the top of that list. And you know what the CDF did about it? No, Jared said. Not a goddamn thing! Bhutan spat the words. And the reason for that was that the CDF was spread thin in the aftermath of Coral, and some general decided what he really wanted to do was try to grab a colony world from the Rabu. In other words, it was more important to go after some new real estate than to defend what we already had. They knew the attack was coming, and they did nothing. And until the Oban contacted me, all I knew was that the reason my daughter died was because the colonial union didn't do what it's supposed to do. Keep safe the lives of those in its protection. To keep safe my daughter. Trust me, Dirac. This has everything to do with Zoe. And what if your war doesn't go the way you want it to? Jared asked softly. The Oban are still going to want their consciousness, and they'll have nothing to give you. Bhutan smiled. You're alluding to the fact that we've actually lost the array and the Enishans as allies, he said. Jared tried to hide his surprise and failed. Yes, of course we know about that. And I have to admit it worried me for a while. But now we have something that I think puts us back on track and will allow the Oban to take on the colonial union by itself. Don't imagine you'll tell me what that is, Jared said. I'll be happy to tell you, Bhutan said. It's you. Sagan scrabbled on the ground, looking for something to fight with. Her fingers wrapped around something that seemed solid, and she pulled at it. She came up with a clod of dirt. Ah, fuck it, she thought, and then sprang up and flung it at the hovercraft as it went past. The clod connected with the head of the second Oban, sitting behind the first. It tilted in surprise and fell off its saddle seat, tumbling to the ground. Sagan bolted from her place in the grass and was on the Oban in an instant. The dazed creature tried to raise its weapon at Sagan. She stepped to the side, yanked it out of its hand, and clubbed the Oban with it. The Oban screeched and stayed down. In the distance, the hovercraft was wheeling around and looking to make a run at Sagan. Sagan examined the weapon in her hand, trying to see if she could make sense of the thing before the hovercraft came back her way, and decided not to bother. She grabbed the Oban, punched it in the neck to keep it subdued, and searched it for an edged weapon. She found something like a combat knife hanging from its waist. Its shape and balance was all wrong for a human hand, but there was nothing she could do about that now. The hovercraft had now turned around completely and was bearing down on Sagan. She could see the barrel of its gun spinning up to fire. Sagan reached down, and with the knife still in hand, grabbed the fallen Oban and with a grunt heaved it into the path of the hovercraft and its gun. The Oban danced as the flechettes sliced into it. Sagan, covered by the dancing Oban, stepped to the side but as close as she dared to the craft and swung the knife as the Oban flashed by. She felt a shocking wrenching of her arm and was spun hard into the ground as the knife connected with the Oban's body. She stayed down, dazed and in pain, for several minutes. When she finally got up, she saw the hovercraft idling 100 meters away. The Oban was still sitting on it, its dangling head held onto the neck by a flap of skin. Sagan pushed the Oban off the hovercraft and stripped it of its weapons and supplies. She then wiped the Oban's blood off the hovercraft as best she could and took a few minutes to learn how the machine worked. Then she turned the thing around and flew it toward the fence. The hovercraft crested the guns easily. Sagan set it down out of their range in front of Harvey and Seaborg. "You look terrible," Harvey said. "I feel terrible," Sagan said. "Now, would you like to ride out of here, or would you like to make some more small talk?" "That depends," Harvey said. "Where are we going?" "We had a mission," Sagan said. "I think we should finish it." "Sure," Harvey said. "The three of us with no weapons, taking on at least several dozen Oban soldiers and attacking a science station." Sagan hauled up the Oban weapon and handed it to Harvey. "Now you have a weapon," she said. "All you have to do is learn how to use it." "Swell," Harvey said, taking the weapon. "How long do you think until the Oban realize one of their hovercraft is missing?" asked Seaborg. "No time at all," Sagan said. "Come on, it's time to get moving." "Now it looks like your recording is done," Bhutan said to Jared, and turned to his desk display. Jared knew it before Bhutan said it, because the vice-like pinching had stopped mere instants ago. "What do you mean that I'm the thing to get you back on track against the Colonial Union?" Jared said. "I'm not going to help you." "Why not?" Bhutan said. "You're not interested in saving the human race from a slow asphyxiation?" "Let's just say your presentation does not leave me entirely convinced," Jared said. Bhutan shrugged. "So it goes," he said. "Naturally, you being me, or some facsimile thereof, I would have hoped you'd come around to my way of thinking. But in the end, no matter how many of my memories or personal tics you may have, you're still someone else, aren't you? Or are for now, anyway." "What does that mean?" Jared said. "I'll get to that," Bhutan said. "But let me tell you a story first. It will make some things clear. Many years ago, the Oban and a race called the Ayla got into a go-around over some real estate. On the surface, the Ayla and the Oban were well matched militarily, but the Aylaite army consisted of clones. This meant they were all susceptible to the same genetic weapon, a virus the Oban designed that would lie dormant for a while, long enough to be transmitted, and then dissolve the flesh of whatever poor Ayla it was living in. The Aylaite army was wiped out, and then so were the Ayla." "It's a lovely story," Jared said. "Just wait, because it gets better," Bhutan said. "Not too long ago, I thought about doing the same sort of thing to the Colonial Defense Forces. But doing that is more complicated than it sounds. For one thing, Colonial Defense Forces military bodies are almost entirely immune from disease. The smart blood simply won't tolerate pathogens. And of course, neither the CDF or Special Forces bodies are actually cloned bodies, so even if we could infect them, they wouldn't all react in the same way. But then I realized there was one thing in each CDF body that was exactly the same. Something I knew my way around intimately. The brain pal, Jared said. The brain pal. Bhutan said. And for it, I could create a time-release virus of its own. One that would embed itself in the brain pal, replicate every time one CDF member communicated with another, but would stay dormant until a date and time of my choosing. Then, it would cause every body system regulated by the brain pal to go haywire. Everyone with a brain pal instantly dead, and all the human worlds open for conquest. Quick, easy, painless. But there was a problem. I had no way to get the virus in. My back door was for diagnostics only. I could read out and shut down certain systems, but it wasn't designed to upload code. In order to upload the code, I would need someone to accept it for me and act as a carrier. So the Omen went looking for volunteers. The Special Forces ships, Jared said. We figured the Special Forces would be more vulnerable to their brain pals locking up. All of you have never been without it, whereas regular CDF would still be able to function, and it turned out to be correct. You eventually recovered, but the initial shock gave us lots of time to work with. We brought them here and tried to convince them to be carriers. First we asked, and then we insisted. Not one cracked. That's discipline. Where are they now? Jared asked. They're dead, Bhutan said. The way the Open insist is pretty forceful. I should have been that, though. Some of them survived, and I've been using them for consciousness studies. They're alive, as much as brains in a jar can be. Jared felt sick. Fuck you, Bhutan, he said. They should have volunteered, Bhutan said. I'm glad they disappointed you, Jared said. I'll be doing the same. I don't think so, Bhutan said. What makes you different, Dirac, is that none of them had my brain and my consciousness already in their heads, and you do. Even with both, I'm not you, Jared said. You said it yourself. I said you're someone else for now, Bhutan said. I don't suppose you know what would happen to you if I transferred the consciousness that's in here. Bhutan tapped his temple. And put it in your head, do you? Jared remembered his conversation with Kynan and Harry Wilson when they suggested overlaying the recorded Bhutan consciousness upon his own, and felt himself go cold. It'll wipe out the consciousness that's already there. Yes, Bhutan said. You'll kill me, Jared said. Well, yes, Bhutan said. But I did just make a recording of your consciousness because I need to fine-tune my own transfer. It's everything you are as of 5 minutes ago, so you'll only be mostly dead. You son of a bitch, Jared said. And when I've uploaded my consciousness into your body, I'll serve as the carrier for the virus. It won't affect me, of course, but everyone else will get its full strength. Then I'll have your squad mates shot, and then Zoe and I will head back to Colonial Union space in that capture pod you've so thoughtfully provided. I'll tell them that Charles Bhutan is dead, and the Omen will lie low until the BrainPal virus strikes. Then they'll move in and force the Colonial Union to surrender. And just like that, you and I will have saved humanity. Don't put this on me, Jared said. I have nothing to do with this. Don't you? Bhutan said, amused. Listen, Dirac. The Colonial Union is not going to see me as the instrument of its demise. I'll already be dead. They're going to see you and you alone. Oh, you'll be a part of this, my friend. You don't have a choice. Chapter 14. The more I think about this plan, the less I like it, Harvey said to Sagan. They and Seaborg crouched at the line of the forest, edging the science station. Try not to think so much, Sagan said. That should be easy for you, Harvey, Seaborg said. He was trying to lighten the mood and doing a poor job of it. Sagan glanced down at Seaborg's leg. "Are you going to be able to do this?" she asked. "Your limp's gotten worse." "I'll be fine," Seaborg said. "I'm not going to sit here like a turd while you two are completing the mission." "I'm not saying that," Sagan said. "I'm saying that you and Harvey could switch roles." "I'm fine," Seaborg repeated. "And anyway, Harvey would kill me if I took his gig." "Goddamn right," Harvey said. "This shit is what I'm good at." "My leg hurts, but I can walk on it and run on it," Seaborg said. "I'll be fine. But let's not just sit here and talk about this anymore. My leg's going to tighten up." Sagan nodded and turned her gaze back to the science station, which was a rather modest collection of buildings. On the north end of the compound were the Oban barracks, which were surprisingly compact. The Oban either did not want or need anything approaching privacy. Like humans, the Oban collected together at mealtimes. Many of them would be in the mess hall adjacent to the barracks. Harvey's job was to create a distraction there and draw attention to himself, leading the Oban and other parts of the station toward him. On the south end of the compound was the energy generator regulator, housed in a large shed-like building. The Oban used what were essentially huge batteries, which were constantly charged by windmills placed at a distance from the station. Seaborg's job was to cut the power somehow. He'd have to work with what he found there to make it happen. Between the two was the science station proper. After the power dropped, Sagan would enter, find Bhutan, and extract him, pounding him unconscious, if need be, to get him to the capture pod. If she came across Dirac, she would need to make a quick determination whether he was useful or if he had gone traitor like his progenitor. If it was the latter, she would have to kill him, clean and quick. Sagan suspected she was going to have to kill Dirac no matter what. She didn't really think she would have enough time to decide whether he was trustworthy or not, and she didn't have her brain pal upgrade to read his thoughts on the matter. Sagan allowed herself a moment of mirthless amusement at the fact that her mind-reading ability, so secret and classified, was also completely useless to her when she really needed it. Sagan didn't want to have to kill Dirac, but she didn't see that she had a whole lot of options in the matter. Maybe he's already dead, Sagan thought. That would save me the trouble. Sagan shook the thought out of her head. She didn't like what that particular line of thought was saying about her. She would worry about Dirac when and if Dirac showed up. In the meantime, the three of them had other things to worry about. In the end, what really mattered was getting Bhutan to that capture pod. We do have one advantage, Sagan thought. None of us really expects we're going to survive. That gives us options. "Are we ready?" Sagan asked. "We're ready," Seaborg said. "Fuck yes," Harvey said. "Let's do it then," Sagan said. "Harvey, you're on." Jared woke from a brief nap to find Zoe staring up at him. He smiled. "Hello, Zoe," he said. "Hello," Zoe said, and frowned. "I forgot your name," she said. "I'm Jared," he said. "Oh yeah," Zoe said. "Hello, Mr. Jared." "Hello, sweetie," Jared said, and once again he found it hard to keep his voice even. He glanced down at the stuffed animal Zoe carried. "Oh, is that Celeste, the elephant?" he asked. Zoe nodded and held it up for him to see. "Uh-huh," she said. "I used to have a Babar, but I lost it. Do you know Babar?" "I do," Jared said. "I remember seeing your Babar, too." "I miss my Babar," Zoe said in a little voice, but then perked up. "But then Daddy got me Celeste after he came back." "How long was he away?" Jared asked. Zoe shrugged. "A long time," she said. "He said he had things he had to do first, but he said he sent the Oban to protect me and watch out for me." "And did they?" Jared asked. "I guess so," she said. She shrugged and said in a low voice, "I don't like the Oban. They're boring." "I can see that," Jared said.
sorry you and your dad were kept apart for so long, Zoe. I know he loves you very much. I know, Zoe said. I love him too. I love Daddy and Mommy and all the grandparents I never met, and my friends from Kabul too. I miss them. Do you think they miss me? I'm sure they do, Jared said, and willfully avoided thinking about what happened to her friends. He looked back at Zoe and saw her being pouty. What's wrong, sweetheart? He asked. Daddy says that I have to go back to Phoenix with you, Zoe said. He says that you're going to stay with me so we can finish up some work here. Your daddy and I talked about that, Jared said, carefully. Do you not want to go back? I want to go back with Daddy, she said, plaintively. I don't want him to stay. He won't be gone very long, Jared said. This just the ship that we brought here to take you home is really small, and there's only going to be room in it for you and me. You could stay, Zoe said. Jared laughed. I wish I could, honey. But we'll have fun while we wait for your daddy, I promise. Is there anything you'd like to do when we get to the Phoenix station? I want to buy some candy, Zoe said. They don't have any here. Daddy says the oven don't make any. He tried to make me some once, though. Well, how was it? Jared asked. It was really bad, Zoe said. I want jawbreakers and butterscotch and lollipops and jelly beans. I like the black ones. I remember that, Jared said. First time I saw you, you were eating black jelly beans. When was that? Zoe asked. It was a long time ago, sweetie, Jared said. But I remember it like it was yesterday.
And when we go back, you can have any candy you want. But not too much, Zoe said, because then my stomach will hurt.
Exactly right, Jared said. We really couldn't have that. A stomachache just wouldn't do.
Zoe smiled up at Jared and broke his heart. You're silly, Mr. Jared, she said. Well, Jared said, smiling back. I try. Okay, I'm going to go, Zoe said. Daddy's taking a nap. He doesn't know I'm here. I'm going to go wake him up because I'm hungry. You go do that, Zoe, Jared said. Thank you for visiting, Zoe. I'm really glad you came by. Okay, Zoe said, turned around and waved back to him as she went. Bye, Mr. Jared. See you later. See you later, Jared said, knowing he wouldn't. Love you, Zoe said, in that casual way that kids do. Love you too, Jared whispered, as a parent. He waited until he heard a door close down the adjoining hall before he let himself release the ragged, tearing breath he had been holding in. Jared looked at the lab, his eyes flitting over the console Bhutan had brought in to manage the consciousness transfer, and lingering on the second creche Bhutan had brought in, the one in which he would place himself before sending over his consciousness to Jared's body, wiping out Jared's existence as if he were simply a placeholder, something put there to mark time until the body's true owner could take possession. But then, Jared thought, wasn't that actually the case? It was Bhutan who was intended to be in this body. That was why it was created. Jared was allowed to exist only because Bhutan's consciousness refused at first to take up residence. It had to be coaxed in to share the mind space Jared had created as caretaker. And now, irony of ironies, Bhutan wanted it all, wanted to push Jared aside entirely. Damn it, Jared thought crazily. I just got this brain set up the way I like it. He laughed, and the laugh sounded shaky and weird to his ears. He tried to calm himself, bringing himself into a more rational state, breath by breath. Jared heard Bhutan in his head, describing the wrongs of the colonial union, and heard the voice of Kynan, whom he trusted more to be honest about these things, echoing the sentiments. He looked into his own past as a member of the Special Forces and the things they had done in the name of making the universe safe for humanity. The Colonial Union did straddle every line of communication, directed every course of action, kept every aspect of humanity under tight control, and fought nearly every other race they knew of with persistent ferocity. If the universe was as hostile as the Colonial Union said, perhaps this level of control was justified. For the overarching racial imperative of holding ground and making a place for humans in the universe. But if it wasn't, if what was fueling the Colonial Union's constant wars was not competition from the outside, but paranoia and xenophobia from the inside, then Jared knew that he and everyone he had known inside the Special Forces and out of it could have, in one way or another, led to the slow death of humanity that Bhutan assured him was out there. He would have chosen to refuse to fight. But, Jared thought, Bhutan isn't reliable. Bhutan labeled the Colonial Union as evil, but Bhutan also chose to do evil things. He caused 3 separate races, 2 with long-standing issues, to come together to attack the Colonial Union, exposing billions of humans and billions of other intelligent creatures to the threat of war. He had experimented upon and killed Special Forces soldiers. He was planning to kill every single member of Special Forces and every other CDF soldier with his brain pal virus, something akin to a genocide considering the numbers and the unique makeup of the Colonial Defense Forces. And in killing the Colonial Defense Forces, Bhutan would leave the colonies and Earth defenseless against any race who chose to claim one of the colonies as its own. The Oban couldn't stop the land rush from these other races, and probably wouldn't even if they could. The reward for the Oban was not land, but consciousness. The unprotected colonists would be doomed, Jared realized. Their colonies would be destroyed, and there would be nowhere for them to go. It wasn't in the nature of the races in this part of the galaxy to share their worlds. Earth, with its billions, might survive. It would be hard to displace billions of humans without a fight. The more sparsely populated and less ecologically burdened colony planets would be far more attractive. But if someone decided to attack Earth, and the Earth had indeed been held back by the Colonial Union for its own purposes, it wouldn't be able to fully defend itself. It would survive, but the damage would be immense. Doesn't Bhutan see this? Jared asked himself. Perhaps he did. Chose to believe that it wouldn't happen that way. Give a thought to what he would do with the moon once he had it. Maybe Bhutan didn't really think the Oban would really, truly give him the war he asked for. Interlaced within all of this, Jared felt a sick-making worry for Zoe. What would happen to her if Bhutan failed or was killed? What would happen to her if he succeeded? Jared felt guilty for worrying about what would happen to one small child when billions of lives would be altered or ended. But he couldn't help himself. As much as anything, he was looking for a way where Zoe lived through all of it. Jared felt overwhelmed by the choices he needed to make, and underwhelmed by the information he had to make them with, and utterly bereft at how little he would be able to do about any of it. He felt like he was probably the last person in the world who should be wrestling with all of this. There was nothing to be done about it now. He closed his eyes and considered his options. An hour later, Jared opened his eyes as Bhutan came through the door, trailed by an Oban. "You're awake," Bhutan said. "I am," Jared said. "It's time for me to make the transfer," Bhutan said. "I've programmed in the process and run the simulations. It looks like it's going to run perfectly. There's no point in putting it off anymore." Far be it from me to stop you from killing me, Jared said, casually. Bhutan paused. Jared saw that coming right out and mentioning his incipient murder disturbed Bhutan. Good, Jared thought. About that, Bhutan said. Before we do the transfer, I can run a directive that will put you to sleep if you want. You wouldn't feel a thing. I am offering that to you if you want. You don't seem to want it, Jared said. It makes the transfer more difficult from what I can see from the simulations, Bhutan said. The transfer will take more security if you're conscious as well. Now then,
By all means, I'll stay awake,
Jared said. I wouldn't want to make this more difficult for you. Listen to that, Bhutan said. This isn't something personal. You have to understand that you offer a way to make this all happen quickly and cleanly, with the least amount of bloodshed on all sides. I'm sorry you have to die, but the alternative is far more death. Murdering every Colonial Defense Forces soldier with your virus doesn't strike me as the least amount of bloodshed, Jared said. Bhutan turned and told the Oban to start the preparations. The Oban went to the console and went to work. Tell me, Jared said, after you've killed all the Colonial Defense Forces, who's going to protect the human colonies? They won't have defenders anymore. You'll have killed them all. The Oban will protect them in the short run, Bhutan said, until we can create a new defense force. Are you sure about that? Jared said. Once you give them consciousness, why would they need to do anything for you anymore? Or do you plan to withhold consciousness until after they give you your next demand? Bhutan gave a quick glance back at the Oban in the room, and then faced Jared. I'm not withholding anything, he said. They'll do it because they've agreed to it. Are you willing to bet the life of Zoe on it? Jared asked. Because that's what you're doing. Don't lecture me on my daughter! Bhutan spat at Jared and turned away. Jared gave a sad shudder, thinking of the choices he was making. The Oban nodded over at Bhutan. It was time. Bhutan looked over to Jared one more time. Anything else you want to say before we get started? He asked Jared. I think I'll save it for later, Jared said. Bhutan opened his mouth to ask what that meant, but before he could, a noise erupted from outside the station. It sounded like a very large gun going off very rapidly. Harvey lived for this sort of shit. His chief worry as they approached the science station was that Lieutenant Sagan would do one of her patented, thoughtful, methodical approaches. Something sneaky that would require him to tiptoe around like a goddamn spy or something. He hated that crap. Harvey knew what he was and what he was best at. He was a noisy son of a bitch, and he was good at making things fall down and go boom. In his few introspective moments, Harvey wondered if his proggy, the guy he was mostly made from, hadn't been something really antisocial, like a pyromaniac or a professional wrestler, or maybe had done time for assault. Whoever or whatever he was, Harvey would have been happy to give him a nice big smack on the lips. Harvey was absolutely at peace with his inner nature, in the sort of way that Zen Buddhist monks could only dream about. And so when Sagan told him his job was to draw attention to himself so she and Seaboard could do their jobs, Harvey did a little dance on the inside. He could definitely draw attention to himself. The question was, how? Harvey was not especially introspective, but this didn't mean he was stupid. He was moral within his limits. He understood the value of subtlety, even if he wasn't much for it himself. And one of the reasons he could get away with being loud and obnoxious was that he was a fair stick at strategy and logistics. Give him a job and he'd do it. Usually in the most entropy-producing way possible, yes, but also in a way that achieved exactly the aim it was supposed to. One of Harvey's guiding lights in terms of strategies was simplicity. All things being equal, Harvey preferred the course of action that let him get into the middle of things and then just buckle down. When asked about it, Harvey called it his Occam's razor theory of combat. The simplest way of kicking someone's ass was usually the correct one. It was this philosophy that had Harvey taking the hovercraft Sagan had stolen, mounting it, and after a few moments to glean the fundamentals of navigating it, rocketing on it toward the door of the open mess hall. As Harvey approached, the door to the mess hall opened inward. Some open heading to duty after dinner. Harvey grinned a mad grin, gunned the hovercraft, and then braked it just enough, he hoped, to jam that fucking alien right back into the room. It worked perfectly. The Oban had enough time for a surprised squawk before the hovercraft's gun struck it square in the chest, punching backward like it was a toy on a string, hurling down nearly the entire length of the hall. The other Oban in the room looked up while Harvey's victim pinwheeled to the ground, then turned their multiple eyes toward the doorway, Harvey, and the hovercraft with its big gun poking right into the room. "Hello, boys," Harvey said in a big, booming voice. "The 2nd platoon sends its regards." And with that, he jammed down the fire button on the gun and set to work. Things got messy real fast after that. It was just fucking beautiful. Harvey loved his job. From the other side of the compound, Seaborg heard Harvey start in on his happy work and had just a little bit of an involuntary shudder. It's not that Seaborg disliked Harvey, but after a couple of combat drops with the 2nd platoon, one got the sense that if you didn't like things to explode unnecessarily around you, you would want to stay well clear of Daniel Harvey. The crash and bang did exactly what it was supposed to. The Oban soldiers at the generator abandoned their posts to help out those of their number who were being cheerfully massacred on the other side of the compound. Seaborg did a modified sprint to the generators, wincing as he did so, and surprised what he guessed were some Oban scientists as he came through the door. Seaborg shot one with one of those weird Oban weapons and then snapped the other one's neck. That was more disturbing than Seaborg would have expected. He felt the bones, or whatever they were, give way as he struck. Unlike Harvey, Seaborg was never a natural with violence. He wasn't much of a natural in anything. This was something he sensed early and hid with overcompensation, which is why so many of his training squad members thought he was an asshole. He got over it. Someone is going to push you off a cliff if you don't. But what he never got over was the idea that when it came right down to it, Special Forces was not a good fit for him. Seaborg went into the next room, which took up the majority of the shed and which housed the two massive forms Seaborg assumed were the batteries he had to destroy. Harvey's distraction was going to work only so long as Harvey managed to keep himself alive, which Seaborg doubted would be very long at all. Seaborg looked in the room for controls or panels that could help him, or at least give some indication how he could shut down the power. He saw nothing. All the panels and controls were back in the room he left the two dead Oban in. Seaborg briefly wondered if he should have left one of them alive and tried to convince it to shut down the power station, but he doubted he would have been very successful at all. "Fuck!" Seaborg said out loud in frustration, and for lack of anything better coming to mind, raised the Oban weapon and shot at one of the batteries. The projectile embedded in the metal skin of the huge battery, momentarily raising sparks, and then Seaborg heard a high-pitched whine, like air whistling out of a very small hole. He looked up at where he shot. A high-pressure stream of some green gas was spurting out. Seaborg looked at it. "What the hell?" Seaborg thought, raising his weapon and aiming at the hole from which the stream was emanating. "Let's see if that shit's flammable." It was. The power generator blast knocked Jane Sagan right on her ass and blinded her for a good 3 seconds. She recovered sight just in time to see large chunks of the power generator's room hurling through the sky in her general direction. Sagan backtracked enough to avoid the debris and instinctually checked her integration to see if by some miracle Seaborg had managed to survive. There was nothing there, of course. You don't survive a blast like that. She could feel Harvey, though, shocked for a moment out of his orgy of violence. Sagan turned her attention to the science station itself, its windows shattered and parts on fire, and it took her several seconds of formulating a plan before she realized that she had integration once more. Knocking out the power somehow brought back her brain pal. Sagan took an entirely inappropriate 2 seconds to revel in the return of her integration and brain pal before she wondered if she were still integrated with someone else. The blast knocked both Bhutan and the Oban to the floor. Jared felt his creche shake violently. It managed to stay upright, as did the second creche. The lights went out, to be replaced a second later by the soft green glow of lights running on emergency power. The Oban got up and went to the wall to activate the lab's backup generator. Bhutan picked himself up, cried for Zoe, and ran out of the room. Jared watched him go, his own heart in his mouth. "Dirac," James Sagan said. "Answer me." Integration flowed over Jared like golden light. "I'm here," Jared said. "Is Bhutan still alive?" Sagan asked. "Yes," Jared said. "But he's no longer the target for the mission." "I don't understand you," Sagan said. "Jane," Jared said, using Sagan's first name for the first time either could remember. "Zoe's alive. Zoe's here, his daughter. You need to find her. You need to get her away as fast as you can." There was an infinitesimal hesitation from Sagan. "You need to tell me everything now," Sagan said. "And you'd better hurry." As quickly as he could, Jared dumped everything he learned from Bhutan to Sagan, including the recordings of the conversations he had begun to create as soon as Bhutan restored his brainpal capacity, hoping against hope that some of his squad might have survived and would have found a way into him. Sagan wouldn't have time to go through all the conversations, but they were there for the record. "We should still take Bhutan back," Sagan said, after Jared finished. "No!" Jared sent the word as strongly as possible. "As long as he's alive, the Oban will come for him. He's their key to the thing they want the most. If they were going to go to war because he asked them to, they would go to war to get him back." "Then I'll kill him," Sagan said. "Get Zoe," Jared said. "I'll take care of Bhutan." "How?" Sagan said. "Trust me," Jared said. "Dirac," Sagan began. "I know you don't trust me," Jared said. "And I know why you don't trust me. But I also remember what you once told me, Lieutenant. You told me, no matter what, to remember that I was Jared Dirac. I'm telling you now, Lieutenant, I know who I am. I am Jared Dirac of the Colonial Union Special Forces, and my job is to save humanity. I am asking you to trust me to do my job." An infinitely long pause. From the hallway, Jared heard Bhutan heading back to the lab. "Do your job, Private," Sagan said. "I will," Jared said. "Thank you." "I'll find Zoe," Sagan said. "Tell her you're a friend of Mr. Jared, and that he and Daddy both said it was okay to go with you," Jared said. "And don't forget her stuffed elephant." Jared sent information on where he thought Zoe would be, just down the hall from the lab. "I won't," Sagan said. "I need to break integration with you now," Jared said. "Goodbye, Lieutenant. Thank you. Thank you for it all." "Goodbye, Jared," Sagan said. And before she broke integration, sent him a wave of something that resembled reassurance. And then she was gone. Jared was alone. Bhutan re-entered the lab and yelled at the Oban, who snapped some switches. The lights came back up in the lab. "Let's get going," Bhutan said to the Oban. "We're under attack. We need to get this done now." Bhutan looked over to Jared briefly. Jared just smiled and closed his eyes and listened to the sound of the Oban tapping on the panel. Bhutan opening and entering his creche, and the low thrum of Jared's own creche powering up for the consciousness transfer. Jared's primary regret at the end of his life was that there had been so little of it. Just a year. But that year, so many people and experiences. Jared walked with them in his mind and felt their presence a final time. Jane Sagan, Harry Wilson, Kynan, General Matson and Colonel Robbins, the 2nd Platoon and the closeness they shared in integration, the strangeness of Captain Martin and the Gamorreans, the jokes he shared with Lieutenant Cloud, Sarah Pauling, best beloved, and Zoe. Zoe, who would live, if only Sagan could find her, and she would. No, Jared thought. No regrets. Not one. Not for anything. Jared heard the soft tap as the open initiated the transfer sequence. He held on to himself as long as he could. Then he let go. Zoe screamed when there was a big roar that shook her room so hard she fell right off her bed and her TV came off the wall. Nanny came over to see if she was okay, but Zoe pushed it away. She didn't want Nanny, she wanted Daddy. And sure enough, in just a minute he came through the door, sweeping her up in his arms and reassuring her and telling her that everything was going to be all right. Then he set her down and said to her that in just a few minutes, Mr. Jared would be coming for her, and she had to do what Mr. Jared said, but for now, to stay in her room and with Nanny, because she would be safe there. Zoe cried again for a minute and told Daddy that she didn't want him to leave, and he said that he would never leave her again. It didn't make sense because Mr. Jared was coming to get her in just a minute to take her away, but it made her feel better anyway. Then Daddy spoke to Nanny and left. Nanny went into the living room and came back holding one of those guns the Open used. This was weird because as far as Zoe knew, Nanny never used a weapon before. There were no more explosions, but every once in a while Zoe could hear gunfire going pop, pop, pop somewhere outside. Zoe got back on her bed, clutched Celeste, and waited for Mr. Jared. Nanny gave out a shriek and raised the weapon at something Zoe couldn't see and then ran out from the doorway. Zoe screamed and hid under the bed, crying, remembering what it was like at Covell, and wondering if those chicken things were going to come get her again like they did there. She heard some thumping in the next room, and then a scream. Zoe covered her ears and closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there were a pair of feet in the room, coming over to the bed. Zoe put a hand over her mouth to be quiet, but couldn't help a whimper or two. Then the feet became knees and hands and arms, and then a sideways head appeared and said something. Zoe squealed and tried to back out from underneath the bed, clutching Celeste, but as soon as she popped out, the woman grabbed her and held her. Zoe kicked and screamed, and it was only after a while that Zoe realized that the woman was saying her name over and over again. "It's all right, Zoe," the woman was saying. "It's all right. Shh, it's all right." Zoe eventually stopped trying to get away and turned her head around. "Where's my daddy?" she said. "Where's Mr. Jared?" "They're both really busy right now," the woman said, still holding Zoe. "They told me to come get you and make sure you were all right. I'm Miss Jane." "Daddy said I had to wait here until Mr. Jared came to get me," Zoe said. "I know he did," Miss Jane said. "But right now, they both have things they have to do. There's a lot going on right now, and it's keeping both of them from coming to find you. That's why they sent me, to keep you safe." "Nanny keeps me safe," Zoe said. "Nanny was called away," Miss Jane said. "It's really busy here right now." "I heard something really loud," Zoe offered. "Wow, that's one of the things keeping everybody busy," Miss Jane said. Okay, Zoe said, doubtfully. Now, Zoe, Miss Jane said, what I want you to do is put your arms around my shoulders and your legs around my waist. Hold on to me real tight and keep your eyes closed until I tell you to open them. Can you do that? Uh-huh, Zoe said. But how will I hold Celeste? Well, let's put her in between you and me right here, Miss Jane said, and put Celeste between her tummy and Zoe's. She'll get squished, Zoe said. I know, Miss Jane said, but it'll be all right. Are you ready? I'm ready, Zoe said. Then close your eyes and hold on real tight, Miss Jane said. And Zoe did, even though when they walked out of her bedroom, Zoe's eyes hadn't closed yet. And as they came into the living room, Zoe saw what looked like Nanny sleeping on the floor. Then Zoe closed her eyes all the way and waited for Miss Jane to tell her to open them again. The Oben Sagan had encountered in the science building largely avoided her, leading her to believe they were mostly specialized as scientists. But every now and again, one of them would try to engage her with a weapon or try attacking her physically. The quarters were too close to wield the awkward Oben rifle with any sort of accuracy. Sagan stuck with the knife and being quick. This approach failed her when the Oben babysitting Zoe nearly took off her head. Sagan threw the knife at the Oben to distract it and then launched herself at it, fighting it out hand to hand. Sagan knew she was lucky that while they were rolling on the floor, the Oben got a leg caught up in the furniture. It gave her just enough time to squirm out of its grip, get on top of it, and strangle the thing to death. With Zoe collected and held in the crook of her arm, it was time to get up. Harvey, Sagan said. Kinda busy right now, Harvey said. Through her integration, Sagan could see him fighting his way toward a new hovercraft. He crashed his previous one into an airship that was trying to get off the ground and kill him from above. I've got the target and I need support and a ride. 5 minutes and you'll have both, Harvey said. Just don't rush me. I'm rushing you, Sagan said, and then stopped the conversation. The hallway in front of Bhutan's apartment led north, past Bhutan's lab, and east into other parts of the building. The lab hallway would connect her quicker to where Harvey could pick them up. But Sagan didn't want to risk Zoe seeing either her father or Jared as they went by. Sagan sighed, went back into the apartment, and retrieved the open weapon, felt it balance awkwardly in her grip. It was a two-handed weapon, and the hands were meant to be open, not human. Sagan hoped that everyone had abandoned the building and would be busy going after Harvey, and that she wouldn't have to use it. She had to use it 3 times. The third time using it to batter an Oben when the ammunition ran out. The Oben screamed. So did Zoe, each time Sagan had to use the weapon. But she kept her eyes shut, like she promised. Sagan reached the place where she came into the building, a blown-out window on the first floor of a stairwell. Where are you? She said to Harvey. Believe it or not, the Oben aren't keen to give me their equipment, Harvey said. Stop bugging me. I'll be there soon. Are we safe yet? Zoe asked, her voice muffled from her head being buried in Sagan's neck. Not yet, Sagan said. Soon, Zoe. I want my daddy, Zoe said. I know, Zoe, Sagan said. From the floors above, Sagan heard movement. Come on, Harvey, Sagan thought. Get moving. The Oben were really beginning to piss Harvey off. Mowing down a couple of dozen of them in the mess hall had been a uniquely satisfying experience, to be sure. Cathartic, particularly in light of how the Oben bastards killed off most of the 2nd platoon. And ramming the little hovercraft into that airship had held its own special pleasures. But once Harvey was on foot, he began to realize just how many of those damn Oben there were, and how much more difficult it was to manage them when one was hoofing it. And then here was Sagan, integrated again, and that was a good thing, but telling him she needed a ride, as if he weren't busy. She's the boss, Harvey said. Getting one of the parked hovercraft was proving to be difficult. The Oban had them in a yard with only one way in, but there were at least two of them out and around, looking for him. And look, Harvey thought, as one zoomed into view. Here comes one now. Harvey had been crouched down and trying to be inconspicuous, but now he stepped out where he could be seen and waved his hands broadly. "Hey!" Harvey yelled. "Asshole! Come get me, you creepy fuck!" Whether by hearing him or seeing him move, the Oban operating the hovercraft turned toward Harvey. Okay, Harvey thought. Now what the fuck do I do? The first order of business, it turned out, was jumping clear of the stream of flechettes that blasted out of the hovercraft's gun. Harvey rolled, came out of the roll prone, and lined up his Oban weapon to shoot at the now receding Oban. Harvey's first shot wasn't even close. The second took off the back of the Oban's head. "That's why you wear a helmet, jackass," Harvey thought, and went to retrieve his prize and then retrieve Sagan. Along the way, a number of Oban on foot tried to do to Harvey what he had done to the Oban previously driving the hovercraft. Harvey preferred to run them down rather than shoot them, but he wasn't picky. "Ride's here," Harvey said to Sagan, and then was more than a little surprised to see what Sagan was carrying. "That's a kid," he said. "I know that," Sagan said, positioning Zoe securely on the hovercraft. "Get to the capture pod as fast as you can." Harvey accelerated to full speed and fled straight. There didn't seem to be any immediate chase. "I thought we were supposed to bring back Bhutan," Harvey said. "Change of plans," Sagan said. "Where's Bhutan?" Harvey asked. "Durak's taking care of him," Sagan said. "Durak?" Harvey said, surprised again. "I figured he was dead." "I'm pretty sure he is," Sagan said. "Then how is he going to take care of Bhutan?" Harvey said. "I have no idea," Sagan said. "I just know he will." Bhutan opened his eyes in a brand new body. Well, not brand new, he corrected. Gently used. His Oban assistant opened his crash and helped him out of it. Bhutan took a few tentative steps, and then a few non-tentative ones. Bhutan looked around the lab and was fascinated to see how much more vibrant and engaging it was. It was as if his senses had been at low volume all his life, and then were suddenly cranked up to full. Even the science lab looked good. Bhutan looked over to his old body, which was brain dead but still breathing. It would die of its own accord in a few hours, or a day at most. Bhutan would use this new body's capabilities to record its death and then take the evidence with him to the capture pod, along with his daughter. If the pod's still there, he figured. It was clear that the Special Forces squad they had captured had somehow escaped. One of them might have taken it back. Well, Bhutan thought, that's fine. He was already spinning an alternative story in his head, one in which he, as Durak, killed Bhutan. The Oban, denied their prize of consciousness, would stop the war and give Durak permission to leave with Bhutan's body and Zoe. That's not quite believable, Bhutan thought. You'd have to work out the details. Whatever story he thought of, however, Bhutan suddenly became aware of a small image flitting across his field of vision. It was a picture of an envelope. "You have a message from Jared Durak," read a block of text that appeared in the bottom of his field of view. "To open it, say open." "Open," Bhutan said out loud. This was curious. The envelope opened and then faded. Rather than a text message, it was a voice message. "Hello, Bhutan," it said in a simulated voice that sounded just like Durak. Sounded just like him now, actually, Bhutan corrected. "I see that you have gone ahead and taken this body. But before I go, I thought I'd just leave you some final thoughts." A wise creature once told me that it was important to make choices, the voice continued. Through much of my short life, I made no choices at all, or at least no choices of consequence. But now, at the end of my life, I am faced with a choice. I can't choose whether to live or die. You've made that choice for me. But when you told me that I had no choice but to help you with your plans, you made a mistake. I do have a choice, and I've made it. My choice is not to help you. I can't judge whether the colonial union is the best government for humanity. I didn't have the time to learn everything I should have learned about it, but I choose not to risk the deaths of millions or even billions by helping you engineer its overthrow. It may be that this will ultimately be the wrong decision to have made, but it is my decision, the one I think that best allows me to do what I was born to do, to keep humanity safe. There is some irony here, Bhutan, in that you and I share so many of the same thoughts, share a common consciousness, and perhaps share the same goal of doing the best for our people. And yet, with all we have in common, we have reached opposite conclusions on how to do that. I wish we had had more time between us, that I had been able to meet you as a friend and a brother, instead of what I became to you, a vessel to pour yourself into. It's too late for that now. Too late for me, and although you don't realize it, too late for you also. Be that as it may, I want to thank you. For better or for worse, I was alive because of you, and for a brief time I was able to experience the joys and sorrows this life has to offer. And I was able to meet and love Zoe, who I pray now will find a way to be safe. I owe you my life, Charles, just as I owe you my death. Now, allow me a digression, which I promise will come around to a compelling point. As you may or may not know, one of the interesting properties smart blood has is the ability to instantly oxidize, to combust. I can't help but think someone encoded that property into smart blood as something of a cruel joke, because I first saw it being used to kill insects that were trying to suck smart blood out of a special forces soldier. But it turned out to be useful too. It once saved my life in combat. Charles, you have engineered a virus that you plan to use to conquer the colonial union. Since you know about viruses as they relate to computers, maybe you've heard of the term Trojan horse as well. This message, my friend and brother, is a Trojan horse. When you opened the letter, you also executed a small program I created. The program instructs every nanobot in my smart blood to combust simultaneously on my command. I estimate it's taken exactly this long for the program to propagate through all of my smart blood. Let's find out. Sagan received a message as she was placing Zoe into the capture pod. It was from Jared Durack. If you're reading this, Charles Bhutan is dead, it said. I had this message scheduled to be sent right after my former brain pal executed the program to combust my smart blood. If the combustion doesn't kill him, and it will, he'll be dead of asphyxiation in just a few minutes. Either way, he's gone, and so am I. I don't know if you'll get it, but I hope you do, and that you are safe and well. Goodbye, Lieutenant Sagan. I'm glad to have known you. And if you see Kynan again, tell him I listened to him and made my choice. Sagan shared the message with Harvey. Very nice, Harvey said. He was Special Forces through and through. Yes, he was, Sagan said, and motioned Harvey toward the capture pod. Get in, Harvey. You're joking, Harvey said. Someone needs to go back with Zoe, Sagan said. I'm commanding officer. I stay behind. Lieutenant, Harvey said. That kid doesn't know me. You're the one who pulled her out of there. You're the one who needs to go back with her. Besides, I don't want to go back yet. I'm having too much fun. I'm guessing that between now and the time the Colonial Union drops a rock on this place, I can clean it out. And when I'm done with that, maybe I'll go in and see if there's anything worth salvaging. So you go ahead, Sagan. Have them send a capture pod for me in a couple of days. I'll be fine. Or I'll be dead. Either way, I'll enjoy myself. All right, Sagan said. If you do go into the compound again, try to get the storage devices from the transfer module in Bhutan's lab. Make it a priority. Well, what's on them? Harvey said. It's not what, Sagan said. It's who. There was a hum in the distance. They're on to us, Harvey said. Get in, Lieutenant. Are we safe now? Zoe asked, a few minutes after launch. Yes, Zoe, Sagan said. I think we are. When is Daddy coming to see me? Zoe said. I don't know, Zoe, Sagan said, and stroked Zoe's hair. I don't know. In the cramped confines of the capture pod, Zoe put her arms up to be held. Sagan held her. Chapter 15. Well, Zai, you were right, General Matson said. Jared Dirac came in handy after all. Matson, General Zillard, and Colonel Robbins were in the general's mess, eating lunch. All of them, this time. General Matson had been the one to formally break the tradition of not letting subordinates eat by ordering Robbins a huge plate of spaghetti bolognese, and responding to another outraged general's reaction by saying, clearly and loudly, "Shut the fuck up, you dried-up turd. This man deserves some goddamn pasta." Since then, other generals had begun to bring in their staffs as well. Thank you, General, Zillard said. Now, if you don't mind, what I want to know is what you're doing to fix these problems with our brain pals. I lost 7 ships because your people left a back door wide open. Robbins has the details, Matson said. They both turned to Robbins, who had a mouthful of beef Wellington. Robbins swallowed carefully. In the short run, we pulled out that back door, obviously, Robbins said. We've propagated the fix on a priority upgrade to the brain pals. That's fixed. In the slightly longer run, we're going through all the brain pal programming, looking for legacy code, backdoors, and other code that could represent a security issue. And we're also instituting virus checks for messages and information sent between brain pals. Bhutan's virus transmission wouldn't work now. It shouldn't have worked at all, Zillard said. There have been virus blockers since right near the dawn of computing, and you didn't implement it for brain pals. You could have killed us all because you forgot to program in basic computer hygiene. It was never programmed in because there was never a need for it, Matson said. Brain pals are a closed system, totally secure from outside attacks. Even Bhutan's attack ultimately didn't work, but it came damn close, Zillard said. Yes? Well, it came damn close because someone at the table wanted to create a body we could stuff Charles Bhutan's consciousness in, Matson said. Not that I'm going to name names. Zillard said. The current series of brain pals are coming to a close anyway, Robbins said. Our next generation of brain pals have been tested by the governments, and they're ready to be implemented across the CDF population. It's a completely different architecture, fully organic, and the code is optimized without the legacy issues of earlier brain pal code. The window is closing on this sort of attack, General. At least by anyone who worked on the previous generation, Zillard said. But what about those who are working on the current generation? You need to find out whether any of them are going to go off the ranch. We'll look into it, Robbins said. See that you do, Zillard said. Speaking of off the ranch, Matson said, what are you going to do about Lieutenant Sagan? What do you mean? Zillard said. Not to put too fine a point on it, she knows too much, Matson said. Through Bhutan and Dirac, she knows about the conclave, and she knows how tightly we're keeping that information bottled up. She doesn't have clearance for that information, Si. That's dangerous stuff. I don't see why it's dangerous, Zillard said. If for no other reason, then it's the truth. The conclave is out there, And if it never gets its act together, we're going to find ourselves up the proverbial creek. It's dangerous because it's not the whole truth, and you know that, Zy, Matson said. Lieutenant didn't know anything about the counter-conclave and how deep we were involved with that. Now we've been playing one side against the other. Things are moving fast. We're getting to the point where alliances have to be formed and choices will have to be made. We won't be able to formally stay neutral anymore. We don't need Sagan out there telling people half the story and starting rumors. Tell her the whole damn story, Szilard said. She's an intelligence officer, for God's sake. She can handle the truth. It's not up to me, Matson said. Szilard opened his mouth. Matson put up both hands. It's not up to me, Zy. If the counter-conclave formally breaks with the conclave, you know what that's going to mean. The entire goddamn galaxy is going to be at war. We won't just be able to rely on our recruits from Earth anymore. We're going to have to ask the colonies to pony up as well. We may even have to start conscription. And you know what that's going to mean. The colonies will riot. We'll be lucky if we avoid a civil war. We're keeping the information from the colonies not because we want to keep them ignorant, but because we don't want the whole fucking Union to fly apart. The longer we wait, the worse it's going to get, Szilard said. We're never going to find a good way to break it to the colonies. And when they do find out, they're going to wonder what the hell the CU was doing, keeping it from them for so long. It's not up to me, Matson said. Yes, yes, Szilard said, testily. Fortunately for you, there's a way out. Sagan is close to the end of her term of service. She has a few months left, I think. Maybe a year. Close enough that we can retire her. From what I understand, she was planning to leave the service when her time was up anyway. We'll put her on a brand new colony, and there she can stay. And if she talks to the neighbors about some conclave, who the hell cares? They'll be too busy trying to get a crop in. Do you think you'll get her to do it? Matson said. We can entice her, Szilard said. A couple of years ago, Sagan became quite attached to a CDF soldier named John Perry. Perry's a few years behind her in his term of service, but if we needed to, we could spring him early. And it seems like she's become quite attached to Zoe Boutin, who is an orphan and who needs to be placed. You see where I'm going here. I can, Matson said. You should make it happen. I'll see what I can do, Szilard said. And speaking of secrets, how are your negotiations with the Oban going? Both Matson and Robbins looked at Szilard warily. There are no negotiations with the Oban, Robbins said. Of course not, Szilard said. You're not negotiating with the Oban to continue Boutin's consciousness program for them, and the Oban are not negotiating with us to knock down whichever of the Array or Enishans is still left standing after their upcoming little war. No one's negotiating with anyone about anything. And how are these non-negotiations not going? Robbins looked at Matson, who nodded. They're not going surprisingly well, Robbins said. We probably won't reach an agreement in the next couple of days. How not wonderful, Szilard said. I want to get back to Sagan, Matson said. When do you think you'll be able to get an answer from her? I'll put it to her today, Szilard said. And I'll tell her to be ready in a week. That should give her time to take care of things that need to be done. Like what? Matson said. Goodbyes and closure, of course, Szilard said. And a few other decisions I am going to ask her to make. Jane Sagan peered into what looked like a miniature light show. What is this? She asked. It's Jared Durac's soul, Kynan said. Sagan glanced over to him. I remember you once told me that Special Forces soldiers didn't have souls, she said. That was another place and another time, Kynan said. And I am not so very foolish now. But very well, it's his consciousness then, Kynan said. Retrieved by one of your soldiers, I believe, and from what I understand, recorded by Charles Boutin. And I understand it is your job to decide what to do with it. Sagan nodded. Szilard had come to her, offering her discharge, the discharge of John Perry, and the custodianship of Zoe Boutin, on the condition that she keep her mouth shut about the conclave, and that she make a decision about what to do with Jared Direct's consciousness.
I understand about the conclave,
Sagan said,
but I don't understand about Dirac.
I'm just curious what you'll do, Zillard said, and refused to explain any further than that. What will you do with it? Kynan asked. What do you think I should do? Sagan asked. I know precisely what you should do with it, Kynan said, but I am not you, and I will not tell you what I would do with it until I hear what you would do with it first. Sagan looked over at Harry Wilson, who was watching with interest.
And what would you do, Harry?
Sorry, Jane, Wilson said, and smiled.
I plead the fifth as well.
This is your call. You could bring them back, Sagan said to Kynan. It's possible, Kynan said. We know more about it now than we did before. It's possible we could condition the brain better than they conditioned Direct's brain to accept Bhutan's personality. There's some risk of the transfer not taking, and then you'd have a situation like what happened with Dirac, where another personality would grow instead, and the other personality would slowly impinge. But I think it's less of a risk now, and in time it won't be a serious risk at all. I think we could bring them back, if that's what you wanted. But it's not what Jared wanted, is it? Sagan said. He knew his consciousness had been recorded. He could have asked me to try to save it. He didn't. No, he didn't, Kynan agreed. Jared made his choice, Sagan said, and it was his choice to make. Erase the recording, please, Kynan. And now you see why I know you have a soul, Kynan said. Please accept my apology that I ever doubted it. Apology unneeded, Sagan said. But apology accepted. Thank you, Kynan said. And now, Lieutenant Sagan, I was wondering if I could ask a favor of you. Or perhaps it's not so much of a favor as calling due a debt between us. What is it? Sagan asked. Kynan looked past Sagan to Wilson, who looked suddenly very uncomfortable. You don't have to stay for this, my friend, Kynan said to Wilson. Of course I'll stay, Wilson said. But let me reiterate, you're a damn fool. Noted, Kynan said. And I appreciate the thought. Wilson crossed his arms and looked vexed. Tell me, Sagan said. I wish to die, Lieutenant, Kynan said. Over the last several months, I have begun to feel the effects of the antidote you provide lessen. Every day I am in increasing pain. We can give you more, Sagan said. Yes, and perhaps that would work, Kynan said. But I am in pain beyond the mere physical aspect. I am far away from my people and my home, and far from the things that bring me joy. I cherish the friendships I have with Harry Wilson and with you. You, of all people. But every day I feel the part of myself that is array, the part that is truly me, grow colder and smaller. Not too long from now there will be nothing left of it, and I will be alone, absolutely alone. I will be alive, but I'll be dead inside. I can talk to General Zillard about releasing you, Sagan said. That's what I told him, Wilson said. You know they'll never release me, Kynan said. I've done too much work for you now. I know far too much. And even if you did release me, do you think the RA would welcome me back? No, Lieutenant. I am far from home, and I know that I could never go back to it.
I'm sorry I did this to you, Kynan,
Sagan said.
If I could change this for you, I would.
Why would you? Kynan said.
You have saved your people from war, Lieutenant. I am merely part of the cost. I am still sorry,
Sagan said. Then repay that debt to me, Kynan said. Help me die.
How would I do that?
Sagan said. In my studies of human culture, I've learned about seppuku, Kynan said.
Do you know it?
Sagan shook her head. Ritual suicide from your Japanese people. The ritual includes a kaishakun, a second, someone who eases the pain of the person committing seppuku by killing them at the moment of their greatest agony. I would choose to die from the disease you inflicted on me, Lieutenant Sagan, but I fear that when the agony is greatest, I would cry for mercy, as I did the very first time, shaming myself and setting myself in motion on the path that led us here. A second would keep me from that shame. I ask you to be my second, Lieutenant Sagan.
I don't think the Colonial Defense Forces will allow me to kill you,
Sagan said.
outside of combat.
Yes, and I find that ironic beyond belief, Kynan said. However, in this case they will. I've already asked General Matson for permission, and he has granted it. I've also asked General Zilla for permission for you to be my second. He has granted it.
What will you do if I refuse?
Sagan asked. You know what I will do, Kynan said. When we first met, you told me that you believed that I wanted to live, and you were right. As I said earlier, that was a different place and a different time. In this time and place, I want to be released. If it means I do it alone, then I will be alone. But I hope that will not be the case. It won't, Sagan said. I accept, Kynan. I will be your second. From the depths of my soul, I thank you, Lieutenant Sagan, my friend.
Kynan looked to listen.
He was crying. And you, Harry? I asked you to attend me before, and you refused. I ask you again. Wilson nodded violently.
Yes,
He said.
I'll do it, you lousy son of a bitch. I'll be there to die.
Thank you, Harry, Kynan said, and once again turned to Sagan. I need 2 days to bring things to a close here. Will you come to visit me on the third day, in the evening? I'll be there, Sagan said. Your combat name, I think, should be sufficient, Kynan said. That's what you want, Sagan said. Is there anything else you would have me do for you? Only one other thing, Kynan said. And I'll understand if you can't do it. Name it, Sagan said. I was born on the colony of Balak, Kynan said. Well, when I die, if I can, I'd like to return there. I know it will be a difficult thing to manage. I'll manage it, Sagan said. Even if I have to take you there myself. I promise it, Kynan. I promise that you will go home. A month after Zoe and Sagan returned to Phoenix Station, Sagan took Zoe on a shuttle to visit the gravestone of her parents. The shuttle pilot was Lieutenant Cloud, who asked after Jared. Sagan told him that he had passed on. Lieutenant Cloud was quiet for a moment, and then began telling Sagan the jokes that Jared had told him. Sagan laughed. At the gravestone, Sagan stood while Zoe knelt and read the names of her parents, clearly and calmly. Over the month, Sagan had seen Zoe change from the tentative girl she had first met, seemingly younger than she really was, asking plaintively for her father, to someone happier and more talkative and closer to the age she was. It was, as it happened, only a little younger than Sagan.
My name is here,
Zoe said, tracing the name with her finger.
For a while, when you were first taken, your father thought you were dead.
Sagan said.
Well, I'm not dead.
Zoe said, defiantly. No, Sagan said, and smiled. No, you definitely are not. Zoe put her hand on her father's name.
He's not really here, is he?
Zoe asked.
Here under me?
No, Satan said.
He died on Earth.
That was where you were before we came here.
I know.
Zoe said, and looked over to Satan.
Mr. Jared died here too, didn't he?
Who did? Satan said.
He said he knew me, but I didn't really remember him.
Zoe said.
He did know you. But it's hard to explain.
Satan said.
I'll explain it to you when you're older.
Zoe looked at the tombstone again. She said in a small sing-song voice. Satan got down on her knees behind Zoe and gave her a small, fierce hug.
So sorry, Zoe. I know.
Zoe said.
I'm sorry too. I miss Daddy and Mommy. I even miss Mr. Jared a little, even though I didn't know him very much. I know they miss him too.
Satan said. She came around to face Zoe.
Listen, Zoe, soon I'm going to be going to a college where I'm going to live. If you want, you can come with me. Will it just be you and me?
Zoe said.
Well, you and me, and a man I love very much.
Satan said.
Will I like him?
Zoe asked.
I think so.
Satan said.
I like him, and I like you, so it stands to reason we like each other. You, me, and him. Like a family.
Zoe said.
Yes, like a family.
Satan said.
Very much, Nicola. I already have a daddy and a mommy.
Zoe said.
I know, Zoe.
Said Satan.
I would never want you to forget them, ever. John and I would just be the two grown-ups who would be very lucky to get to live with you. John.
Zoe said.
John and Jane. John and Jane and Zoe.
John and Jane and Zoe. Satan repeated.
John and Jane and Zoe.
Zoe said, standing up and moving to the rhythm of the names.
John and Jane and Zoe. John and Jane and Zoe. I like that.
Zoe said. I like it too, Satan said.
Well, okay then.
Zoe said.
Now I'm hungry.
Satan laughed. Well then, let's get you something to eat.
Okay.
Zoe said.
Let me say bye-bye to Mommy and Daddy.
She ran to the headstone and planted a kiss on it.
I love you,
she said, and then raced back to Satan and took her hand.
I'm ready. Let's eat.
Okay, Satan said.
What would you like? What do we have?
Zoe said. Oh, there are lots of choices, Satan said. Pick one.
All right.
Zoe said.
I'm very good at making choices, you know.
Well, Satan said, hugging the girl close.
I'm so very glad to hear it.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.
In making this statement, which I do of my own free will, I wish first to make it perfectly clear that I am not in any way trying to gain sympathy, nor do I expect any mitigation of whatever sentence the court may pronounce. I am writing this in an attempt to refute some of the lying reports broadcast over the prison radio and published in the papers I have been allowed to see. These have given an entirely false picture of the true cause of our defeat, and as the leader of my race's armed forces at the cessation of hostilities, I feel it my duty to protest against such libels upon those who served under me. I also hope that this statement may explain the reasons for the application I have twice made to the court, and will now induce it to grant a favour, for which I can see no possible grounds of refusal. The ultimate cause of our failure was a simple one, despite all statements to the contrary. It was not due to lack of bravery on the part of our men, or to any fault of the fleets. We were defeated by one thing only, by the inferior science of our enemies. I repeat, by the inferior science of our enemies. When the war opened, we had no doubt of our ultimate victory. The combined fleets of our allies greatly exceeded in number and armament those which the enemy could muster against us, and in almost all branches of military science we were their superiors. We were sure that we could maintain this superiority. Our belief proved, alas, to be only too well-founded. At the opening of the war, our main weapons were the long-range homing torpedo, dirigible ball lightning, and the various modifications of the Clydon beam. Every unit of the fleet was equipped with the
Jack March is a privateer of the interstellar kingdom of Kalaskar and a former Iron Hand commando of the malevolent Final Consciousness. In truth, he is an alpha operative of the Silent Order, the most efficient and feared intelligence organization in space.
This is Audible.
Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Crystal Sphere by Andre Levade, narrated by Graham Halstead. Chapter 1. A thunderstorm raged over the metropolis. The thin strip of electrostatic car wipers was struggling under the torrents of rain pelting the windshield. My ancient rover held the road well. The squat outlines of deserted neighborhoods whizzed past. The disabled autopilot flashed an anxious red light on the dashboard. I loved it. The road softly flew past. It was already dark. Flashes of lightning illuminated the urban escape. Earlier that day, the city had been melting in its own heat, making the expected evening weather change all the more welcome. Gradually, the tension began to release me. The stuffy office, the bullying boss, even the realization of the fact that my own life was flashing uselessly past didn't feel as oppressive any longer. Another couple of miles, and everything would be different. I touched the communicator to activate it and sent a voice message. Hi, Krista. I'll be online in about 20 minutes. Don't be late. We have an instance to do, remember? A bolt of lightning raked at the unfinished power substation building, digging into its latticework pylons and exploding in cascades of sparks. It looked both beautiful and spooky. Network connection temporarily unavailable. Only a year ago, this used to be the asshole of the world. Now the whole area was already consumed by the advancing metropolis. The little town I'd grown up in was already in line for demolition, deep foundation pits gaping along both sides of the road. I'd been offered several relocation choices. I hadn't decided on any of them yet. I was playing for time. Tonight, I might know. Once we completed the quest, I'd have a serious conversation with Krista. We'd been together for almost 6 months. We'd been a party, doing a complex, non-linear plotline which was impossible to complete solo. We had 24 hours to do one final dungeon. And then what? Would we just disband? Was it the time to go our own ways? As I pondered over all of this, I hadn't even noticed the last mile flying past. A dilapidated 9-story building filled my headlights,
its facade darkened with time. They weren't going to tear it down quite yet. Normally, big developers have little patience for stubborn tenants like myself, and they'd been on my case for a good 10 days already. All because of Krista and the quest, which had a strict deadline. Moving house really didn't fit into my immediate plans. Well, look for yourself. I had a 9 till 5 job in the office. I couldn't very easily quit either, considering I'd just taken out a loan to upgrade some equipment I used. Plus, my bank refused to accept Middle-earth in-game currency. They told me, in as many words, that this legendary virtual world was rapidly becoming defunct, losing users by the minute. So, they offered me an ultimatum. Either I joined Crystal Sphere, the Infosystems Corporation's latest baby, or I'd have to use my real-world wage as security. I parked up by my front door. They'd already disconnected the elevator. Never mind, I could use some exercise. The steel door of my apartment creaked, as old as everything else was here. My parents' furniture and choice of design didn't look like much, that's for sure. Still, these modest quarters housed some of the latest cutting-edge gaming equipment. A U-shaped console occupied the room's center. Activation, I said, heading for the kitchen. The fridge was empty, but I was not interested in food at the moment. I grabbed an energy drink and used it to wash down an upper. Tomorrow I might have a proper meal. Why not? I could invite Krista to a cafe. A restaurant I couldn't afford, but still we needed to meet up, have a chat and celebrate. She lived somewhere nearby. We'd mentioned our respective providers once, discovering we used the same company, which meant we were almost neighbors. I didn't give a damn about unwritten real-life meeting etiquette. Both Krista and I were responsible adults. It was probably true what they said these days about the latest technologies steering humanity toward extinction, meaning all relationships were rapidly becoming virtual. I disagreed entirely. My own parents had met online, and that was a fact. A familiar beep awoke me from my musings. The system had booted up. I finished off my drink, stripped down, and changed into an elastic suit studded with emulators, a real beauty. Welcome to my world where a run-of-the-mill office rat was about to transform into a level 124 warrior. 3 interlinked curved monitor screens with a built-in holographic 3D function glowed invitingly at the center of the room. I slumped into the seat and connected my suit's optic cables to the console. Reality faded into the background of my mind. Middle-earth. Login. At first, the virtual world appeared on the screens as a 2D picture. Then it expanded, acquiring depth, and enveloped me, surrounding me with high-density holograms. For a few more seconds, I still could make out the outlines of my apartment. Then they too disappeared. Tactile emulators kicked in. My hand got caught on a bramble. A thorn pierced my skin. The quiet rustle of the apartment's environment generator was drowned out by the whisper of leaves. Earthly forest smells wafted in my face. A beetle buzzed past, the sound quickly dying away in the thick shadows. The immersion levels were unbelievable. This was as far as the latest gaming technologies could possibly take you. Science just couldn't improve on this, no matter how hard they tried. I was alone. Krista was late. This wasn't like her at all. I looked around me, taking in the small forest glade. The entrance to the dungeon was still sealed with shimmering magic symbols. A scared rabbit scampered past. The ferns next to a mossy cliff swayed. A mom. Well, what do you think? A werewolf level 105, the system informed me.
Tantor Audio, a division.
Hello there, my name is James E. Wisher, and I'm the author of 38 novels, including Death and Honor, the audiobook you're about to listen to. I'd like to take a moment to thank you for stopping by my YouTube channel. I'll be adding more audiobooks all the time, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. One other item of note, if you see any of my audiobooks on a channel other than this one, please let me know.
Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents 3 Ezekiel by Peter Caudron, narrated by Kevin T. Collins. Stage 1, Descent. Ezekiel. In the name of Jesus Christ, Amen. In unison we all reply, Amen, even the servants. Sweat beads on my forehead, flies buzz through the air. The humidity is stifling even though the sun has set. Flashes of lightning to the north signal a storm that's destined to pass by without offering relief. Boiled potatoes, diced chicken, maize, and carrots are dished up and placed in front of me. Etiquette demands I wait for my father to start. He tastes his food and only then seasons it with a little ground pepper and a pinch of salt from a wooden bowl set in the middle of the table. To season first is to insult the chef, so I follow his lead. Respect is important. Respect is all that separates us from the savages. Brother Jacob, the itinerant missionary sitting opposite me says, sprinkling salt on his food as he addresses my father. He's forgotten his etiquette and is seasoning his food before tasting. Forgotten or deliberately ignoring. What do you make of the star? I can see my father fuming inside. His jaw clenches, his nostrils flare. Only slightly, but I notice. His eyes narrow. Brother Mordecai doesn't care. I've spent years wilting under my father's gaze. For me, the missionary's defiance is a delight. I wait, watching to see if Dad will say anything about the breach, but secretly, I envy Brother Mordecai. I don't see the point in mindless rituals. We only ever taste one bite before seasoning our food. If we were honest, we'd try everything before deciding on seasoning, as logically each component could require different amounts of salt and pepper. But I keep these heretical thoughts to myself. Dad ignores him. The missionary points at the roof. Surely you've received the Vatican's communique about the star. The scriptures are clear. My father has made a career out of ignoring others. Only angels and demons inhabit the heavens. Mordecai wipes his mouth with a cloth napkin. Being an itinerant missionary, he's supposed to call on us regularly, but we haven't seen him for almost 6 months. On the contrary, he says, the scriptures hint at a divine realm extending well beyond that of mere angels. Napkins are typical of the contradiction that is life in the African jungle. We're in an old colonial home with glaring white walls and a high roof. Fans turn slowly on the ceiling, giving the illusion of circulating air to cool the room. Monkeys scream in the trees just beyond the windows, struggling to compete with the incessant noise of millions of insects swarming through the night. And yet here we are observing etiquette, as though we were dining in the White House. Brother Mordecai replaces his napkin. Ezekiel speaks of the cherubim and the seraphim, creatures other than angels, creatures that did not originate on earth, giving us insights into a celestial order far beyond that of Michael, Gabriel, and Lucifer. It could be that the heavens have as much diversity as life here on earth. I'm loving this. It isn't often my father gets flustered, and we've all seen the star. There's no ignoring it. A brilliant white light sitting high above us, visible from twilight till dawn, shining directly overhead, stationary at the zenith of the heavens, the highest point in the night sky. It's the one star that never moves. The sun, moon, and planets, the stars of Orion and Pleiades, they all drift through the sky each night, slowly rolling from east to west. But not this star. Like the missionary, it's defiant. My father adopts a defensive tone, using language far too formal for the jungle. Ezekiel is not a book I've oft read. You should, Mordecai says between bites, talking with his mouth full, and no doubt infuriating my father even more. Having quietly watched Brother Mordecai for almost an hour since he arrived, I don't think he intends to challenge my father's authority. He seems oblivious to the intrusion he's created with just these few words, but the silence that follows drives the point home. Sweat runs down my neck. Insects buzz around the gas lantern beside the open window. The only electricity we have comes from generators and depends on erratic diesel shipments from Tanzania, so most of our lighting and cooking is wood-fired or uses gas bottles dragged overland by traders. Outside, natives sit around a campfire, tossing dried animal dung onto the flames to ward off mosquitoes. The fire crackles. Flames reach for the stars. Glowing embers rise into the night. The villagers are talking, laughing, yelling. Someone's singing. To me, they're irrepressibly happy, which is a stark contrast to how I feel. Haven't you wondered, Brother Mordecai pauses, pointing with his fork, yet another breach of etiquette. Why here? Why is it hovering over the Democratic Republic of the Congo? What do they want with the jungle? They. My father glances at me, but his eyes quickly return to our guest. I suspect he'd like to send me from the table, as I've asked the same question only to be rebuffed. If he could, he'd get rid of me, but he doesn't want his disdain to become too apparent. Such a reaction would be indecorous. Sending me away would raise awkward questions. What about you, Josh? Me? Yes, you. You're the future. Your father and I, we do what we can. We pray, we teach, we minister and help the locals, and yet we are but a single generation. It is you and your friends who hold the future. What do you think of our visitors? My father would never speak to me like this. I don't know. But you must have thought about them, sitting up there looking down on us in the African jungle. What do you think they're looking at? The birds, I say. Or gorillas? He nods, chewing a piece of chicken and thinking for a moment before speaking again. Perhaps that's it. Perhaps there's something they want from the Congo. The equator runs all the way around the world, through the Atlantic, parts of South America, the Pacific, Indonesia, the Indian Ocean. Even here in Africa, it passes through Kenya, Uganda, Gabon, and Somalia. Maybe Josh is right. Maybe there's something right here in the Congo they want. We do have the last of the wild gorillas. Maybe. Dad is trying to bury the discussion. Somewhat conveniently, his eyes stare down at his food, but he's not hungry. He picks at his plate. You should read Ezekiel. Brother Mordecai points at me with his knife, which to my father's mind is an even more unforgivable than using his fork as a pointer. You really should. It's fascinating. Here, listen to this. He pulls a small Bible from his back pocket and places it on the table. The spine is broken, causing the book to fall open somewhere near the middle. The tiny margins have impossibly small writing, like the scratchings in a cave, only in blue pen as well as an ultra-fine pencil. There are numerous verses underlined in red. Several sections have been highlighted in fluorescent yellow. I feel as though I can read my father's mind. This is no way to treat the Word of God. The missionary pushes a few pages brutally to one side, creasing the paper to prevent it flipping back. Yes, this is it. Listen to this, straight from the Holy Writ. And their appearance was like burning coals of fire, and like the appearance of lamps. It went up and down among the living creatures, and the fire was bright, and out of the fire went forth lightning. He stops reading, looking at me as though the conclusion should be obvious. My father shifts in his seat. Wild, huh? And that's right here in God's Word. We focus on the New Testament, my father says. But it's all true, right? Haven't you thought about this section? Haven't you wondered about it? Dad shakes his head, but the missionary is nothing if not zealous. If you lived in those times, how would you describe a spaceship? Now, Mordecai. My father raises his hand in exasperation, wanting to be heard. That's nothing but speculation. This is Ezekiel. Mordecai is too excited to notice my dad's reluctance. This is the testimony of Scripture. Listen. Their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were round, and they sparkled like burnished bronze. My father sighs, saying, "It makes no sense," which is a stunning admission from him. Yes, it makes no sense if we're describing a person or an animal, but this could be a description of the lunar module setting down on the moon. Think about that. Thousands of years ago, Ezekiel described something that only now makes sense. That's cool. Mordecai. Dad is not comfortable with this conversation, but I'm soaking it up. Ever since the star appeared, I've wondered. I've wanted answers. Just because is not a reason. Don't get distracted doesn't satisfy my curiosity. As much as Dad wants me to focus on here and now, it's there and tomorrow that drives me on. Isn't that true of all humanity? Has anyone ever really been satisfied with here and now? We're restless. We long for adventure. Change scares my father because he's afraid of the future. But for a teen like me, the unknown is exciting. The wheels within wheels. Mordecai gestured with his hands, waving them in a circular motion. Now, Mordecai, listen, brother, listen to the written word. A whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud, and a fire enfolding itself, and a brightness was about it. And out of the midst thereof, as the color of amber, out of the midst of the fire, and their appearance and their work was, as it were, a wheel in the middle of a wheel. Brother Mordecai looks up at my father, as though those words alone are enough to convince him. When Dad shrugs, he continues, "Surely you're curious. We read about this back in seminary. What does it mean? Why was it written? What was Ezekiel trying to tell us? He wrote that section for a reason. He wanted us to know about this encounter." Dad's quiet. Nothing in Ezekiel's world fits that description. Nothing. But what if he saw something that wasn't from his world? What if he saw something from another world? My dad is stern. "Mordecai, I would have you refrain from filling my son's head with such madness. This is nothing but speculation, delusions." A gyroscope. Mordecai completely misses my dad's comment. Wheels within wheels, Jacob. Ezekiel was describing a gyroscope almost 2,500 years before it was invented. My father wipes his mouth with his napkin and pushes back from the table. Both the meal and the conversation are over. I take one last bite of chicken and get to my feet. "You will get ready for bed," my father says with a sense of determination that cannot be defied. I nod slightly and excuse myself. As I leave, I hear them arguing. "Cardinal Mbutai is in Kisangani this week. Come with me, Jacob. Listen to him. He's a good man. The church is embracing this.
The Holy See says this is a catalyst for change. I know my calling. The Church isn't going to run from this. His Holiness is embracing the science. I will have no more of this talk. Our mission is clear. We are here for the salvation of these people. No good can come from turning our eyes to the heavens. Listen to yourself, Mordecai says. You would bury your head in the sand rather than accept that something wonderful, something marvelous, something miraculous is happening? I bid you good night. This is happening whether you like it or not. The door slams. Brother Mordecai yells, You cannot ignore this, Jacob. You can't hide in the jungle forever. I brush my teeth, being sure to face the mirror squarely, making as though I have no other concerns. Definite strokes up and down, not side to side, being gentle on my gums, but ensuring any food caught between my teeth is dragged out, just as I've been taught. As for the argument, I didn't hear anything. Nothing. As expected, the bathroom door flies open, and my father storms in. I keep brushing. I don't care. It's important he thinks that. My father has always been on the outside of the church. I guess that's how we ended up here, almost 50 miles of rugged, muddy roads south of Kisangani, deep within the Congo. Raging rivers, impenetrable canopy, voracious insects, birds, monkeys, apes, and leopards are our neighbors. Our parish consists of villagers, farmers, and occasionally a repentant poacher. Most of them only speak French and a muddle of local languages, but we're teaching them English. The star has been in our sky for almost 2 weeks. Everyone talks about it, mainly because we get a near constant stream of news snippets filtering down to us from the outside world. How much of it's true? I don't know. The tribesmen say it's an omen, but they see ill in all change. When we arrived 3 years ago, we were blamed for bringing a famine. From what we've heard, the church is divided on the issue, although Brother Mordecai would have us think otherwise. Contact with intelligent extraterrestrial aliens? Creatures that arose on some other planet? Around a strange sun? My dad's right. It's madness, and yet somehow it's happening. Not even Hollywood could spin the idea of aliens capturing an asteroid and moving it into orbit around Earth, and then just leaving it sitting there like a diamond in the sky. Nothing's happening according to our schedule. It's as though they're ignoring us. There are no slick silver spaceships landing on the front lawn of the White House, no invasion, no buildings being blown up or alien death rays scorching our cities. Just a tiny pinprick of light high in the sky. I'm sorry you had to witness that. My dad rests his hand on my shoulder. I keep brushing my teeth and shrug slightly. No big deal. He says, I have to go to Ubandi to visit the sick. Asha will put you to bed. I nod and spit into the sink. My father isn't a doctor, but he's trained in first aid and once worked as a paramedic in Boston. He's treated his fair share of gunshot wounds, mostly from people he knew when he was, somewhat ironically, a member of the Pagans motorcycle gang. On one hand, it's surprising he ended up in the jungle with a teenage son. On the other, it's right on brand for him. Nothing has ever been simple or clear-cut for my dad, certainly not predictable. For him, discipline is the way to deal with demons. I think that's why he's so strict with me. He feels as though he needs to build a fence around me so I don't end up like him. But I'm not him. I guess that's hard for him to realize. He means well, but I feel as though I'm suffocating. Around here, though, being a paramedic is like being a brain surgeon. Dad's a miracle worker, although the medical aid he provides mainly consists of setting splints on broken limbs and cleaning out infected wounds. In the jungle, it's impossible to keep sores clean and dry. so he ships in iodine by the crate-load. Ubandi is a 40-minute drive across the mountains. He won't be back until after midnight. Once the sound of his diesel jeep has blended in with the jungle noise, I creep to my bedroom window and peer outside. A black face stares back from the shadows below the windowsill. Pearly white teeth smile at me. Quietly, I lift the window and slip out into the night. I didn't think you were coming. To me, Yana is the most beautiful teen in the world. Her hair has been plaited in tight cornrows winding across her scalp. Colorful beads hang from plaits at the back of her head. They knock against each other softly as she moves, which I find hypnotic. She's wearing a traditional African dress, resplendent with color. Red, blue, and yellow flowers have been meticulously embroidered on her black dress by her mom, spreading out from her collar like sunflowers. Both the sleeves and the dress itself are broad, catching the air and keeping her cool. Her dark skin glistens beneath the starlight. I take her hand, and she squeezes my fingers with a sense of strength I've never known in any other girl. We had a guest. I saw him, she says. I sneak a kiss, leaning in and pecking softly at her cheek. Yana recoils slightly, leaving me feeling cold. I pause, unsure what to make of her reaction, but she responds to my impetuous advance by rushing in and kissing me briefly on the lips. Her kiss is almost a bump. Our noses squish, and she pulls back as quickly as she came in, smiling, laughing. Girls are strange. I'm not sure I understand Yana. There's something mysterious about the way she reacts to me. It's almost as though she's as unsure of me as I am of her. Neither Yana nor I feel comfortable with the term dating, and yet we want to be together. Is it the jungle? Is it that I'm the pastor's son? Is it that I'm white? Forbidden love, though, carries its own allure. Come, she says. Raka has a television. He's watching them on the news. Them. I'm not sure I'll ever get used to that term. But how? It's not simply the lack of electricity or electronics that keeps us isolated from the outside world. Television signals don't reach this far into the jungle. He has a dish. He shipped it overland from Kinshasa. We creep away from the parsonage, staying in the shadows, leaving the neatly manicured grounds around the manse and cutting behind the church. Raka is a village elder and lives in a hut beside the river, so we sneak along the bank, trying to avoid being seen by the villagers, as word will surely reach my father. I smell the diesel generator long before I hear it. Such is the wall of noise coming from bugs and monkeys and various birds screaming within the jungle. Far from being quiet, night is when the jungle comes to life. Lights flicker through the window of a mud hut. A large satellite dish sits precariously on a thatched roof, threatening to break through and crush anyone inside. The generator chugs away with a constant rhythm, blowing dark smoke into the air. We peer in through the window at a grainy image. There are a dozen people in the hut, mainly men. Chunks of static break up the image, while the audio is patchy, but there's no doubt about what's being discussed. You can see of the alien spacecraft. Contrary to what has been spread on social media, there is no reason to believe the capture of the asteroid Croinia presents a threat to life on Earth. NASA and ESA have confirmed the asteroid is in a stable geosynchronous orbit, roughly 36,000 kilometers above the equator. To put this in perspective, the asteroid is orbiting almost 100 times higher than the International Space Station, which is why the prospect of sending an Orion spacecraft to investigate this occurrence requires considerable logistics and planning. There's no conspiracy, no intentional delays, It simply takes time to bring everything together for a launch, but we are on track for tomorrow. The image is in black and white, which is surprising. If anything, it adds to rather than detracts from the intrigue. Dark shadows hide most of the alien spacecraft. Smooth curves, wavy lines, and various bulges and tubes dominate the vessel, which reminds me of an instrument from a brass band, perhaps a tuba or a French horn. At the rear, there's a cluster of spheres and several bell-shaped engines. The craft itself, though, is dwarfed by the asteroid. To my mind, it looks like a steampunk cruise ship docked beside a floating mountain. The light we see when we look up at the night sky is sunlight reflecting off Cruinia. The starship itself is not visible at this distance without the aid of a telescope. Have we established what they want from us? A news anchor asks from somewhere off-screen. No. Why are they here? Why did we go to the moon? The aging scientist asks in reply. From the subtle rhythm in his accent, it's clear the scientist, speculating on the nature of the alien visitation, is from the Indian subcontinent, but has spent years, if not decades, in either England or the US. He speaks with a soft voice, almost in a whisper, but his words carry a sense of dignity. Were he not wearing a microphone, his comments would be lost, which seems to make their preservation all the more important. His hair is wispy, as though it's bracken from a bush caught in a breeze. Rather than being white, his sideburns appear almost silver. Why did we land rovers on Mars, he asks. Why did we send probes to Jupiter, Saturn, and beyond? It's just a guess, but there's good reason to believe they're as curious about us as we are about them. From what we can see, the universe is a lifeless desert, and yet in the midst of the emptiness and desolation, there's an oasis teeming with life here on Earth. If you were out there, wouldn't that make you curious too? The anchor doesn't sound convinced, but how can you be sure they don't mean us any harm? I can't, but there's no reason to assume they're hostile. That might be our fear, our natural assumption, but that doesn't make our assumptions right. But they haven't responded to any of the messages we've sent. Maybe they can't hear us. Think about how hard it is for us to communicate with other animals right here on Earth. We can't decipher a conversation between dolphins or whales, and yet they are mammals, just like us. Cuttlefish communicate using color. Dogs use scent to speak to each other. It sounds silly, almost comical, but bees speak using what we describe as interpretive dance. For a scientist, he's somewhat unorthodox, gesturing with his hands and rocking his head, making as though he's ready to get up from the table and dance before the cameras to reinforce his point. I get the feeling he's ready to party, but he smiles, laughing at himself, and continues. Spiders communicate via vibrations in a web. What we think of as obvious, sound and pictures, may be nothing but static to them, so we need to be patient. We're preparing a mission to conduct a flyby of Cruinia and attempt contact using a variety of transmission along the electromagnetic spectrum. Perhaps they'll respond to a direct presence in space. The mission parameters are to use an elongated orbit, one that allows us to inch closer with each pass, but one that gives plenty of room to abort if need be. Could that be perceived as a threat? It's a risk. He sounds almost melancholy, but they already know we're here. Remember, they arrived on our doorstep. They chose to visit us. They know life is flourishing down here. Some scientists have called for an automated flyby, but we're human. I think we should own first contact. I don't think we should shy away from what is arguably the most significant encounter in the history of life on this planet. A flyby with a crew of 3 is a low-risk option. The thing about orbits is they're highly predictable. They'll know exactly where we are and where we're heading, probably with a degree of accuracy that's greater than anything we can calculate. It will also tell them something about our intelligence and our level of technological sophistication, as well as our interest in them. The anchor asks, but why Cruinia? Why did they capture an asteroid and bring it into orbit around Earth if they're not intending to use it to attack us? I whisper to Yana, and why here? Why above the Congo? Shh. Cruinia is a resource. From what we can see of the alien craft, it appears they're mining the asteroid in much the same way we once intended to with the Orion deep space missions. So what are they building? I don't know. Nobody does. But not knowing is no cause for fear. It's cause for further inquiry. Why are they flying above Africa? Why not America or Europe? He raises an eyebrow at the suggestion. You really want them flying over America? His point seems well taken by the reporter. We have a few ideas about why they're over Africa. For a start, the location chosen by the alien vessel is the closest equatorial point to the African pole of inaccessibility. You're going to have to explain that one. Every continent has a point of inaccessibility, marking its most remote location, the furthest point from any coastline. So it's difficult to reach. He sounds confused. For us, not them. For them, it represents the most central location on a given landmass. For them, it provides the greatest access to any terrestrial continent, which may suggest they're thinking about maximizing their opportunity for exploration. The anchor doesn't sound convinced. So they hate water? Maybe. Or perhaps there's some other reason. Perhaps they're interested in some other aspect of Africa. Maybe they've chosen a location with a low population density. Or perhaps they're interested in the diversity of life in the jungle. Or it may be entirely coincidental, and we're reading too much into their location. Perhaps they have calculated some other approach and are intending to move into a low Earth orbit, and the current location is simply a convenient parking spot. We really don't know, but we are open to learn. One of the villagers turns, looking out the window. Both Yana and I drop from sight as she bellows, "Hey, you kids! You should be in bed." "Go," Yana says, and I dart away, followed closely by her. A shadow looms at the window, looking out into the night as we slip behind the huts. My heart pounds in my throat as we run through the darkness. Yana giggles, laughing at our adventure. There's yelling from behind us. It's probably not related to our escapade, but it causes adrenaline to course through my veins regardless. Village life is loud. No Netflix, and people find plenty of other things to do in the evening. Out of the 100 or so villagers, there were only 15 people in Raka's hut. It seems most of them simply don't care. We hide in the shadow of the church. Look, Yana points up into the darkness. There, just beyond the steeple, is a single white star. There's no shimmer, no sparkle or hint of any color. We lie on our backs in the long grass, staring up into the sky. Do you think they can see us? I don't know, is all I can say in reply. Seems everyone wants answers, but there are none to be found. Is it a good thing or bad? I understand what Yana means. Life in the jungle is simple. One of the things my dad warned me about when we first came here was the high mortality rate among children. In the U.S., childhood deaths are rare. Death happens, but to older people, or sick people, or someone caught in an accident, and it's rarely seen by anyone other than doctors and nurses. Here, death is an unwelcome guest at each home. People die all the time, especially kids. Old Raka had 7 children. He has 3. Yana's sister Harma died last year. Death comes swiftly. Harma was fine one day, pale and languid the next, dead by the weekend. No one knew why. Dad works with the World Health Organization and a number of other NGOs to provide vaccines and antibiotics to the villagers. If I get a fever, or even just a runny nose, Dad goes into a tailspin. Seeing that helps me to understand why he's here and why he's so strict with me. He cares. For all his grumpy defiance, deep down it hurts him to see anyone die, especially children. When it comes to my life, he feels as though his discipline can keep evil at bay. I'm not so sure. I don't know that microbes care about etiquette or protocol. When Yana asks if the alien craft is good or bad, I know precisely what she means. Superstitions run rampant in the village. As crazy as some of them are, they are a means of trying to reconcile cause and effect. People want explanations. For the tribe, that comes from the traditions of the elders. For my dad, it comes from the scriptures. As for me, I'm not sure what I believe. A month ago, I would have been much more confident, but seeing an alien star above us is unsettling. There's an intelligence there, but it's not of this world. Like Brother Mordecai said, it's neither an angel nor a devil, but there's no doubt about its intelligence. That brilliant light holds hidden intention, and that's unsettling. Good or bad? Is life that simple? I hope so, but I doubt it. I want to sound decisive for Yana, so I say, good. She needs to hear that. We both do. I think so too. Yana rolls over and props herself up on my chest. We kiss, although it does seem strange kissing in front of aliens. Kind of like kissing in front of my dad. Now there's a thought I want to shake from my mind. My hand slips down to her waist and across her lower back. Suddenly, a red-hot poker stabs at my leg. I jump, pushing backwards in the grass. Yana swats at her thigh. Ants! I could never say this to my father, or even to Yana, but God damn you, Africa. You ruin everything. Visitors. Breakfast is a quiet affair in our home as my dad reads a lot. Normally just the Bible or an autobiography. He's not much for fiction. Today, though, he's moody. He storms into the dining room from the kitchen. I don't want you hanging around with that girl. I stare at my mush, stirring it with a spoon. Ground millet and cornmeal wears thin after a few days. After a few years, it's like eating glue. Someone told him about us last night. He hasn't said as much, but it's obvious. I want to protest, but I can't. He'd shout me down. You have to understand. We're different. Dad tries to sympathize, but he's not sympathetic at all. I'm not sure what he means by different. This isn't the first time he's been cryptic about subjects like sex and relationships. A biker gang member turned priest turned missionary with a son in tow isn't exactly conventional, and Dad keeps a lot bottled up inside. I'm 17, Dad. I can make my own decisions. You will do as you're told. I hate this. I hate him. I have no recourse. I want to argue, but there's no argument to be had. Father wins. That is all. The anger must show on my face. Perhaps my body language is saying the words my mouth dares not speak. You need to realize, for you, this is puppy love. For her, it's a ticket out of the jungle. She's using you. My lips tighten. I stare at the wall, refusing to look at him. I forbid you, Joshua. You will have nothing to do with her. Is that understood? I clench my jaw, determined not to respond. If I cannot protest, I refuse to agree. Josh, is that understood? Adrenaline surges through my body. I clench my fists beneath the table, doing all I can not to explode in anger. My knee bumps one of the legs of the table, and my spoon clatters to the polished wooden surface, betraying my frustration. Do this for me, Josh. Joshua, I'm talking to you. All he'll get from me is a slight nod, but no words. Say it. My blood seethes, boiling within me, threatening to erupt. Say it! I explode. Regrets be damned. No, I yell. I won't. You can't make me. You will do
Oh
as you're
merde,
told.
mais qu'est-ce que c'est que toutes ces
He slams his
saloperies?
fist on the table, and a butter knife falls to the floor, but I'm too big to hit. He may threaten violence, but he dares not strike me, as he knows I'll fight back. I wouldn't win. We both know that. Physically, he's far stronger, but it would damage his perception of himself. Man of peace and all that crap. Josh. Our argument is drowned out by the sound of helicopters rushing in across the jungle canopy. We've had helo drops before, but never this close or this low, and only ever in response to a medical emergency. The beating of the rotors shakes the house, causing the roof to flex with the changing air pressure. It's as though a storm has descended on our home. Outside, dust kicks up off the ground, swirling in a cloud. Although unseen, the position of the chopper is clear from the thumping above the roof and the shaking of the windows. A military helicopter circles from one side of our home to the other. Dad runs outside. I follow close behind. There are 4 helicopters hovering over the village, beating the grass roofs of the various mud huts flat. Straw, twigs, sticks, and branches swirl through the air. Villagers stop what they're doing, shielding their eyes as they look into the sky. Thick, heavy, dark ropes fall from the open sides of several helicopters, trailing from the doorways and landing with a thud in the grass. Soldiers abseil into the grounds of the church, which even to me seems sacrilegious. Our village doesn't have a helipad. There's no room. The forest canopy is too thick to clear. As it is, most of the huts are set between trees. Keeping the jungle from growing back takes considerable work by the women while the men are out hunting, and our village is little more than a spotted clearing in the dense canopy. My father marches over to the closest soldier as he unclips from his rope and secures his rifle. Several large packs glide down other ropes, with only the friction on their carabiners slowing their descent. They land with a thump in the dust. Soldiers are common in the jungle, but never from choppers. Normally, we have 1 or 2 patrols pass through a week, either on training exercises, while searching for poachers, or out tracking rebels. These particular soldiers, though, aren't African. I spot an American flag on the shoulder of the closest soldier. Only the red, white, and blue of the Star-Spangled Banner has been replaced with khaki, beige, and a deep winter green. My father is protective, standing between me and the soldier, demanding answers. What is going on? The soldier looks at him with indifference, speaking into a microphone slung over his shoulder. "Jacob Chambers?" the soldier yells over the thumping of the rotor blades. "Father Chambers?" "Yes." "Petty Officer Enrico Garcia, SEAL Team 2. Lieutenant Jackson is looking for you, sir." Garcia points, but his movements are robotic. The deliberation he has with even the simplest of hand motions is unlike anything I've ever seen. He seems more mechanical than human. His gloved fingers are stiff, as though they're reinforced with steel rods, while the muscles on his arm are sharply defined. He could be directing traffic. Lieutenant Jackson sees us talking and jogs over with a hand outstretched in friendship. He yells, "Father Chambers, right?" Over the sound of the rotors, I hear chainsaws starting up. Several of the seals begin cutting into the trees behind the church. Sawdust flies to one side, spraying through the air as the whirling blades eat into the trunks. The seals are methodical, brandishing their chainsaws with the precision of a samurai warrior working with a thin metal sword. Broad stance, muscles flexed, sweat dripping. Within a minute, the first of the massive trees is groaning, then cracking, and then falling, crashing into the jungle with the sound of thunder. What is going on? My father points at the falling trees, but with far less vigor than Garcia. The lieutenant looks relaxed. Garcia, though, stands to attention. He has his hands clasped behind his back. His chest is as thick and imposing as any of the trees. Everything about the seals screams of determination. Black military boots, thick cotton trousers with disruptive patterns, combat vest over a singlet, camouflage paint on their bare arms. I have no doubt Petty Officer Garcia could whip his rifle down from his shoulder in less time than I could blink.
We need to secure an LZ for the choppers.
Lieutenant Jackson sweeps his hand out, pointing at the jungle, making as though a mere gesture is enough to fell the mighty trees before him. Unlike the other soldiers, who are wearing what equates to bicycle helmets with camouflage markings, the lieutenant is wearing a baseball cap. His hair is straggly and not a typical military buzz cut.
I can see what you're doing.
My father is pissed. The veins on his neck are starting to bulge. He calls out over the sound of the helicopters buzzing overhead like a swarm of hornets.
Why?
We have 4 helos on station. Only 2 will stay with the team. We need to put them on the ground before they start sucking on fuel reserves.
But why?
Dad yells as yet another helicopter passes low overhead. Rather than hovering, the helicopters are circling, shifting position, surveying the village from every angle.
You're not answering my question.
No, I'm not. The lieutenant turns toward another soldier running up beside him with a map. The 2 men point out features, discussing the clearing of the jungle. My father fumes. He's not used to being sidelined. Several of the village elders gather beside my dad, talking with him. Concern lines their weathered faces. The lieutenant points at them, still yelling over the noise of the helicopters flying overhead.
We're going to need your help shifting those fallen trees. I need the ground cleared to 5 feet. Nothing above 5 feet so we can set these birds down.
The village elders look to my father. Not all of them are Christian, but they all trust him. Religion and ideology aside, there's no doubt his presence here has saved lives. I can see my father seething inside. His teeth are clenched, but he nods, looking to the chief. The village chief turns, waving with his hands and calling his men over. Above us, 4 helicopters sway just a few feet above the jungle canopy, thrashing the air. Branches sway as though caught in a storm, leaves swirl in the wind. The lieutenant marches over to the church, looking at it carefully. I'm not sure if he wants to knock it down or take it over, but he's clearly evaluating his options.
It's the star, isn't it?
Yes, Father Chambers, it's the star. Now I need you to coordinate the natives. We have to clear this low-lying scrub, and quick. If we can't flatten the area within the next 60 minutes, the helos will be recalled. Why should I help you? The lieutenant points up. Because I'm here to protect you from them. Nothing more needs to be said. My dad nods and moves off. He organizes the men of the village, explaining the urgency in cutting the undergrowth. A line of men spread out behind the seals, moving through the fallen jungle with machetes and long knives hacking at the foliage. I help some of the soldiers lift fallen trees, dragging them to one side. The trees are too heavy to carry, but by lifting one end, we can pivot, dragging the dense upper branches from where they fell shifting the trunk out of the way. The villagers work with their machetes, hacking at the fallen branches, lowering the profile of the decimated trees. "Stay close, kid." Petty Officer Garcia grabs me, pulling me to one side as a 10-foot-long branch whips past just inches from my head, crashing into the undergrowth. "Thanks." I scramble to keep up with him. "It's Joshua." "Josh." I extend my hand in friendship. Petty Officer Garcia shakes my hand with an iron grip. "You're all right, kid." I wish he wouldn't call me kid. I'm not a child. If there's one thing a teen wants, it's to be grown up. There's nothing worse than being caught in the middle and treated like you're still a kid. He seems to sense some reticence on my part and ruffles my hair. Great. Now I'm being patronized like a dog. "Gum?" That causes my face to light up. "Sure." There's something about the instant hit of sugar that comes from chewing gum. All is forgiven, Petty Officer Garcia. The chainsaws being used by the SEALs are bigger and longer than anything I've ever seen. The blades are easily 4 foot in length, and the stream of sawdust flying through the air behind them reaches 10 to 15 feet, sending wood chips cascading like water from a fountain, showering the bushes in tiny flecks. All the trees fall the same way, out in front of us. The precision with which the soldiers are attacking the forest dawns on me. The SEALs are laying the trees down between the various trees still standing ahead of them, avoiding them. Some of the fallen trees catch in the limbs and branches of other trees deeper within the jungle, but most fall clear, flattening the lower trees and bushes. Several other soldiers have smaller chainsaws they brandish with one hand. They strip the trunks of various fallen trees, cutting down the debris rising above the jungle floor. The noise is overwhelming. Petty Officer Garcia and I join one of the teams lifting a fallen log. It's hard work, but as I'm shorter than the soldiers, at times it seems as though I'm not lifting anything. Once we've swung the trunk around to the edge of the jungle, the soldiers give a count of 3 before tossing it into the foliage. If any of these logs were to land on someone's feet, they'd crush them, bones and all. I'm sweating profusely in the heat, but loving the work. We clear enough ground for one of the choppers to land, and it descends with what feels like hurricane-force winds, throwing tiny sticks and bits of debris at us. I turn my back to the chopper, but that doesn't stop my legs and arms from being whipped by flying branches. Ouch! My lower calf muscle erupts with pain, having been slashed by a loose branch hurled through the air. A thin line of blood seeps from my leg, but the injury doesn't bleed, as it is as fine as a razor blade. It stings like a paper cut. "Makes you feel alive, doesn't it?" Garcia yells as the rotors wind down on the chopper behind us. The whine of the engines dies, and the wind drops. I laugh, having never thought of pain this way. "Sure, I guess." Garcia laughs as well, slapping me on the back. Petty Officer Garcia is stocky, with broad thighs and a neck that seems to blend in with his shoulders. I doubt he's carrying more than an ounce of fat on his body. He must be of Mexican descent, as his hair is jet black, while his skin has an oily sheen in the oppressive heat. "You're all right, Josh." "Thanks." The helicopter that landed behind us is considerably different from the one I saw Garcia descend from. He came out of the chopper with open sides and a soldier standing in the doorway mounting a machine gun. This helicopter, though, is longer and wider. Instead of soldiers, civilians begin climbing out, carrying crates and boxes. The 2 military helicopters circling overhead depart, leaving only one more civilian chopper in the air. Working with a machete is exhausting. We take turns slashing at the undergrowth, while the village women bring us water and slices of millet cake. The ground is uneven, covered in rotten wood, thick vines, and saplings. There's a reason the natives haven't expanded the village, and it's not because of the work involved or the astonishing rate with which competing